The Girl in 402. I knew one day I would have to tell this story. It took me a year to finally sit down and do it. I've been told that doing this could help me move on, but that's not what this is for. I don't expect to move on. The Girl in 402 will always be with me. I'm telling this story simply because I have to. I lived there for 2 years. It was a tiny little unit, tucked away on the very right of the 4th floor. Bachelor is almost generous. It was the kind of dingy place that never looks bright, no matter how many lights you have on. But I liked it. I'm good with a small space. I enjoy not having that much to take care of. I could do without the bug problems, the leaks, the electrical problems, and the rotten smells that just sort of happen. But it is what it is. There was a level of comfort as well to living on the 4th floor. Nobody robs a random 4th floor apartment unit. Nobody can peek into your window. It's unlikely to get shot at. Yeah, I lived in one of those kinds of cities. You didn't walk around at night if you could help it. You just didn't. I got accustomed to noise there. The cars, the sirens, the dogs barking, the shouting, the occasional echoing pop of a gunshot. It all becomes a whirling auditory soup. I learned to tune it out fairly quickly. In fact, I learned to tune out a lot of things. I was in one of those periods of life that I think some people call the grind, but really, it's more like being beaten into submission. Working to live, living to work, not living at all, just continuing to exist. All of this to say, I wasn't very perceptive or sociable at this time. I was sleepwalking and daydreaming through life. I'd say I could do my routine blindfolded, except for the fact that I would stub my toe in the same spot on the coffee table 4 times a week at least. Funny how that works. I guess that was part of the routine too. But that's what I mean about not being perceptive. The building could have caught fire, and most days I probably wouldn't have noticed until I actually went up in flames. I didn't retain any faces I saw or names I heard. It was all just a blur, each day blending into the next. Until one night. I got home from work like usual in the evening as the sun began to descend past the buildings. I couldn't afford a car, but thankfully my work was close enough to walk to. The days were getting shorter now, so my walks home became more brisk. The apartment still smelled of dust and paint as they had finally sent someone to replace a mouldy bit of wall the day before. I could still feel the sensation of dust collecting on my tongue when I opened my mouth and it getting sucked into my nose with every inhale. The smell of paint was strong, but infinitely better than some of the other smells. I opened the window to attempt to ventilate the place. I emptied the bucket of rust-coloured water collecting in the bathroom. They couldn't be bothered to fix that as well, and I collapsed onto my bed. This was my ritual. After every workday, I would always take 10 to 15 minutes to just spread out on my bed like a cat and decompress from everything. But tonight, after about 2 minutes, I heard a noise. This noise stood out from all the outdoor soup because it sounded a lot closer, and it sounded like a voice. A soft, feminine voice, making some kind of subtle moan or whimper. I froze in place. It startled me. It sounded so close, like it might be in the room. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't want to make a noise. I wanted to hear it again so I could tell where it was coming from. For a second, I thought it might be coming from under my bed. After a few seconds, the sound repeated. A faint, girly whimper, a bit louder than the last one. This time I could tell where it was coming from. It was behind me, specifically the other side of the wall behind my bed. That gave me some relief. It was my neighbour. But then I was confused. I didn't remember ever hearing my neighbour making noise before. If I could suddenly hear a noise that soft, that mild, why couldn't I hear anything before? Did I even have a neighbour before? Is this person new? I felt a rush of shame at just how detached I had become. I reached back into my mind to try and recall any memories I had about my neighbour. I couldn't find a single one. I remembered some people being on my floor, but I couldn't remember ever seeing anyone enter or exit the door next to mine. I did, however, recall seeing people yesterday morning trying to move a couch up the stairs in the lobby. It was a fairly regular occurrence to see things like this. People rotated in and out of this place all the time. I suppose nobody else really wanted to stick around that long, and I can see why, but I guess that answers it. As peculiar as it is, I didn't have a neighbour before. For 2 years. And now I do. And now they're whimpering. Why are they whimpering? Slowly, these sporadic whimpers become more defined sobs. A woman was crying. I didn't know what to do. I just decided to be as quiet as possible and put on some headphones to let them have their privacy and spare myself from feeling any more awkward. It felt wrong to hear this, and I immediately felt bad for this person. I made sure to play some extra loud music. About an hour later, I removed my headphones and the noises had stopped in the interim. I very briefly debated going over and telling them about how thin the walls apparently are, but I made the much easier decision to wait. Wait until they do something loud and not so private so I can use that as the excuse. Like the TV or something. I was weighing my options. But I couldn't talk to them about this. I couldn't say, "Hey, you were crying real loud over there." The rest of the night was quiet, but I didn't have the best sleep. This disturbance in the routine and the thought of having to face this person at some point was giving me some anxiety. By the morning, however, the alarm kicked me back into the routine. I heard no noises from the neighbour, so life resumed. I got back home from work that night, much later than usual, because someone decided to no-show at work. Walking home in the dark made me paranoid, and I hated days when this happened. When I got inside, I was relieved, and the dust and paint were not nearly as oppressive to the senses this time. I did the window, the water bucket, and then collapsed on the bed like clockwork. What happened yesterday was still on my mind, so I made sure to be extra quiet when laying down. After a few seconds of silence, I was ready to try and remove the whole ordeal from my brain. Then I heard the voice. I couldn't make out the first word I heard from the other side of the wall, but I listened for the rest. It was a poetry book. I heard in a muffled but distinctly feminine voice. Quieter than yesterday, I thought. She must be further away from the wall. I can't remember exactly. It always feels like we're going somewhere. Maybe that's why we see them most at night. I mixed up our glasses. There was a moderate gap of a few seconds between everything she said. Clearly, I was only hearing half of a conversation. Phone conversation, most likely. Or else the other person is just insanely quiet. It was difficult to gauge her tone from how muffled the voice was, but there was a kind of melancholy in it. I wondered what was going on, and I kind of laughed at how random the phrases were. I thought about listening further, but I stopped myself. It wasn't my business, it's not for me to hear. I once again thought about going over and letting her know about the noise, but it didn't feel like a good time. I put on my headphones once again to try and enjoy the minimal amount of respite I had left in the day, and that was the end of it for that night. The third night, I got home on time. I was a bit surprised not to hear anything from her at first. I guessed that maybe she went to bed early or went out for the night. It was Friday after all. Usually people do things on Friday nights. I still made sure to be quiet when near her wall just in case she was sleeping. I made a mental note to look up how much soundproofing panels cost. I probably should have thought of that earlier. I got up from my 15-minute work sucks bed sprawling and headed over to my computer to do that important research. But, as I often did, I forgot my coffee table exists, and I stubbed my toe. The heavy table shifted inches across the wooden floor and pain shot through me like a shockwave. I don't remember which expletive left my mouth involuntarily that time, but it was definitely one of them. I was so annoyed. Every damn time. I could just move the table. Why don't I ever just move the fucking table? Are you okay? My heart leapt in my chest. I physically jumped back on one leg. I thought she wasn't home, and I forgot how close she could sound. It scared the shit out of me. She also spoke quite loudly. She probably assumed it would be harder to hear through the wall than it was. Oh, yeah, I'm good. Sorry, I just stubbed my toe, I responded back in a shaky voice. Shit, that sucks. I could hear a chuckle in her voice. She was clearly amused. Her volume decreased to match mine. I laughed in return. It happens all the time. So sorry to disturb you. No, it's fine. I'm just reading. You sure you're good? That sounded violent, she responded, sounding half concerned and half joking. Yeah, no, I'm all right. It sounded worse than it was. It's a heavy table and the walls here, I began to explain before she cut me off. They're really thin, huh? She finished my thought and then continued. I can hear you so well. That's insane. I'm surprised I didn't hear you before now. Yeah, I guess I'm quiet. And, well, I'm at work most of the day and get home late. So, I didn't like how awkward I sounded. I think I forgot how to have normal conversations. Has it been noisy for you? I'm sorry if it was, I didn't know. I just moved in. She sounded very kind and friendly. I was taken aback by it a little bit. Oh, don't be sorry, and nothing much. I think I probably heard you talking on the phone a bit the other night. I didn't listen in or anything, I put on my headphones. I explained. I hoped she believed me about the headphones. It was the truth, but it's hard to trust that sort of thing. I didn't mention the crying. I didn't want her to feel awkward or anything. Oh, sorry about that, she said. I detected a hint of confusion in her voice, but I ignored it. It's okay. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. I just didn't know when it would be a good time, and it's new to me too. I didn't have a neighbor before, I don't think. As I spoke, I found it harder to rationalize why I hadn't told her before now. I really should have. Really? How long have you been here? She asked. 2 years. No one lived here before me for 2 years. Are you sure? She was very perplexed. Well, honestly, no, I'm not sure. I just never heard anyone before, and I never saw anyone before. I probably sounded like a total recluse, but I was more interested in why she was so confused. Oh, that's strange. I'm pretty sure there were people living here right before me, at least that's what the guy said. Her tone had shifted, and what she said sent a bit of a shiver down my spine. It didn't make any sense. How could I not hear them? Not once, when I could practically hear this woman breathing. After a brief silence, she spoke again and returned to a more casual tone. Well, maybe they weren't around much. Maybe it was a second home or something. Anyways, sorry again about the noise. I'll get some soundproofing stuff for my end right away. I admired her positivity, and I didn't feel any judgment from her for how strange I probably came across. It was really nice. And she had a point about it being a second home. That could be the case. I don't know why they would have a second home in this shitty building, but what else could the explanation be? I'm Jane, by the way. Nice to kind of meet you, she added in a chipper manner. While it was refreshing to have such a pleasant interaction, a small part of me worried about her. She was so carefree and optimistic, almost naive. She must be new to the city. I wondered how long it would take before this place whittled away at her trust in humanity, the trust that she seemed to give to me so freely. The thought of her spirits being slowly crushed like mine made me sad. I'm Lee. Nice to meet you too. A small impulse told me not to give my name, but I decided to reciprocate her trust. And yeah, I'll soundproof my end too. Have a good rest of your night, and be careful, she said. I found that slightly ominous, but then I remembered the toe thing. I will, I chuckled. Enjoy your book. That was my first conversation with the girl in 402. Over that weekend, we spent a lot of time getting acclimated to each other's presence as we each waited to get our soundproofing. I expected it to be a lot more awkward than it was. I attribute all of that to her. She had a way of making everything seem fine and almost playful. She would knock on the wall 2 times and say things like, about to vacuum, sorry, and my bad, when she would make noise. I would follow her lead and do the same 2 knocks. It was kind of nice. Out of the blue on Sunday, she knocked twice and said, you know, it's weird. I don't hear my neighbors on the other side at all. Only you. We pondered over that a bit. She didn't seem to sweat it much, but it was odd that it was only on one side. These odd things were beginning to stack up. Why just this wall? Why only now? I began to wonder if more odd things have been happening all along, and I'm only starting to notice them now. Monday night, I got home to find my package had arrived. The soundproofing was here. It was a little bittersweet seeing it on my doorstep. I knocked twice and told her I got it. She confirmed that she got hers too. She actually went out and physically bought it. I guess that speaks to the kind of people we are. We both said we'd put it up right away, both of us not wanting to continue to inconvenience each other any longer. But then, that didn't end up happening. Instead, we just kept talking. I didn't mean to, and I don't think she did either, but we just kept finding more to say. The friendly small talk about the building and whatnot gave way to more meaningful conversation. We talked about how we got to where we were. We talked about where we wanted to go from here. I wound up sitting on the floor with my back to her wall, and I could hear words right behind my head, as if we were back to back. Luckily, the paint on that bit of wall was dry by now. To her, this place was a fresh start. She didn't go into detail, and I didn't want to pry, but it was clear that this was some kind of escape from something. Maybe that's why she was so upbeat, because she was able to escape a bad situation. Or maybe she was just always this upbeat. She told me that she was going to enroll in the college here and that she was going to start an online shop and work as a waitress on the side. Eventually she wanted to open a restaurant. She even told me where and what the name and theme would be. She told me all these plans, all these wonderful things she wanted to do, all laid out step by step. I don't know what was preventing her from doing them before, but it made me smile hearing how excited she was about them. Something about the conviction in her voice made me truly believe she could do it all. Then she asked me about my plans. I froze up a bit. I didn't have plans. I wish I did. I was envious of people who did, but I could never seem to figure it out. At some point, I think I shut that part of me off entirely. This was as far as I got, is what I told her. We sat in silence for a bit after that. "There's still time," she said softly, breaking the silence. I could feel in her voice a new level of comfort and safety. All guards were down on both sides. She knew what I needed to hear, and I knew somehow that those words meant more coming from her than they would anyone else. We simply got each other. In that moment, there was no wall. Eventually we said goodnight and agreed to put the panels up tomorrow. Those soft, comforting words rattled around in my brain all night long. They never really left. I woke up early the next day and I began putting them up before work. It was a bit sad at first, but it's not like she was gone or anything. She was still right next door. We could just be friends normally now. I went to work excited about the idea. On my way home, I decided that I would properly introduce myself face to face. Just to say hi. I felt confident enough in doing so by this point of knowing her. I got up to the door of 402, and after a brief hesitation, I did the 2 knocks. About 2 minutes passed, and there was no answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I was disappointed, but not dejected. She must not be around. I'll try again tomorrow, I thought. When I got inside, I was immediately struck by how much quieter it was. All that constant city noise was getting absorbed by the panels. I didn't even think about that. I wasn't used to this kind of quiet. Now, every small sound was large. I felt vulnerable. Like all the noise was a big, comfy blanket I could hide under, and now I'm exposed like a nerve. It would take some getting used to. An hour passed in this utter, dreary silence. I tried to brave it without distraction to try and acclimate as quickly as possible, but it was just too freaky, so I had to put on some music. Not 5 seconds into the song, I heard "No Way" coming from the wall. It was her. "Jane! You can still hear me?" I almost shouted in disbelief. "Did you put your things up?" she responded. Her voice was exactly as clear as before. "Yeah, did you?" "I covered the whole wall," she shouted. "What the hell?" I was feeling mixed emotions. On one hand, it was nice to talk to her again. On the other hand, what the hell? We were both utterly stumped by this. Neither of us could come up with an explanation or a solution. She offered to try and ask the super to come do something. I told her she could try. Eventually we settled back down and accepted the situation. "Well, shit. I guess you're here to stay," she said. "I guess I am." I couldn't tell if she was happy about this or annoyed. I couldn't quite tell if I was either. "All right. I hope you like ABBA then." I hated ABBA. This was a nightmare. We resumed our routine from the days before. It remained mildly inconvenient, while also being oddly comforting. That night, we talked more, sat in the same spots on the floor as the night before. I don't know why we chose to sit on the floor when both of our beds were right there, but it felt right. The discoloration of the new patch of paint on the wall marked the talking spot perfectly, and it felt a bit nostalgic. It's not often you sit on the floor as an adult. With all the excess noise being drowned out, it felt like she was even closer. I could literally hear her breathing. We talked a little bit about our upbringings, and we aren't terribly different. Her dad sucked. My dad died. We all got fucked up somehow. The good news is she informed me that I don't snore loudly at night, which is a huge relief. I laid up in bed after she had said goodnight. I still hadn't acclimated to the silence, and now I had to bear it if I wanted to sleep. It wasn't working. I was just awake with my thoughts, which is a place I usually hate being, but not so much tonight. I thought about Jane, and I thought about the weirdness of this situation. As odd as it all was, it was at least interesting. By far the most interesting thing to happen to me since I moved here. I began having those middle-of-the-night urges to Google the principles of sound waves and how they travel, or how often apartments are vacant for long periods of time. But I resisted, determined that if I laid here unmoving in the dark long enough, sleep would happen. Briefly piercing the silence, I heard a mattress creak a few times and blankets shift. It sounded like she rolled over, then back to nothing. I checked the clock. 2 a.m. Maybe sleep was hopeless. I stared into the dark of my apartment so long I started seeing abstract shapes and folds fade in and out of the shadows, and the walls seemed to wobble, as they are wont to do. I was so tired. I began to fade, but then another mattress creak brought me back to lucidity. This one was different. It was a deeper creak, and singular, like one fluid motion. She sat up. Without question, that was the sound. But that was the only sound. No creaks, no fidgeting, no swiping sounds of blankets moving while she slowly awoke. It was strange and abrupt. It could be that she had a nightmare, but there was no heavy breathing or gasping or any of that. I waited to hear another sound, but it didn't come. A half hour passed. I didn't hear her get out of bed. I didn't hear her lay back down. Was she just sitting? My mind began to paint a picture of a woman sitting still in bed in the pitch-black darkness, and it unnerved me. Maybe she did lay back down, just slowly and softly enough that I didn't hear it, I thought. Maybe she had her book or something. She said she was reading the other day. Maybe she never sat up at all, and I mistook that sound for something else. I didn't hear anything else that night, and about an hour later I managed to get some sleep. I wondered if I could bring this up to her. Would it be weird? Eventually I decided against it. I don't want her thinking about me listening to her sleep. The situation is already a bit uncomfortable as it is when it comes to privacy. Plus, it was probably nothing. The next night I got home and double knocked on the wall. She double knocked back. This was our new normal. "Hey, never date a tennis player. You know why?" she said. "Why's that?" I responded through my grin as I dealt with the water bucket once again. Love means nothing to them. She made sure to sound extra dramatic. Wow, that's tremendous," I responded, bemused. "I'm going to hit you with one of those every day," I decided, she said emphatically. "Oh God." I pretended to sound annoyed. "That's right. This is why I don't have a boyfriend. They all run away. But you can't run away." "I can move away." "No, you can't. You're broke as shit just like me. If you could have, you would have by now." She had a point. "So deal with it. Here. What do you call a beehive with no exit?" Number no more. This is harassment. I weep for your future husband. When you bring a man over, I'm going to shout at him to run as fast as he can. I will just scream bloody murder until he leaves. Unbelievable. "God damn it, I like that one," I replied. I couldn't lie. "Also, I'm never bringing a man over here. Are you kidding? You hear enough as it is." Again, she had a point. We went about our business, and later that night, we talked a bit more. These floor chats before bed we'd started having had become a highlight of my day, and I began looking forward to them while I was at work. A part of my brain was trying to recontextualize this into a romantic thing, but it really wasn't that, and I didn't want it to be. At least not right now. It was just nice. It was nice having someone to talk to, who was easy to talk to, who made me laugh, and who I felt comfortable with. It was nice to feel genuinely connected to somebody after feeling disconnected for so long. It was nice to have a friend. "Can I ask you something?" I inquired. "Yeah?" she answered without hesitation. "Why did you trust me so early on?" I had this question for a while, but I felt comfortable enough now to ask. Jane paused for a moment before responding. "What makes you think I trusted you?" I was a bit taken aback by her question. "Oh, well, you were just so friendly and open. I was just wondering, this is a seedy place and you don't know me." She cut me off. "I was friendly, yeah, but that's how you have to be. That's like customer service voice. I don't want to anger the strange man living next to me, you know?" That made a lot of sense. I didn't think of it that way. She continued, "But I trust you now." "Yeah. Yeah, I think you're a good guy. I think you probably won't kill me. What about me? Do you trust me?" "I mean, I'm still not 100% convinced you exist, to be honest. I've still never seen you. You didn't answer your door when I tried to say hi, so you might just be a figment of my imagination." "Who's to say?" I joked, but a part of me thought that would actually explain things. "Wait, when was this?" she asked, sounding surprised. "Oh, after we put up the soundproofing. I was going to say hi when I got home from work, but you didn't answer." "Really? Damn, I didn't hear you," she responded, sounding legitimately disappointed. "Well, that's a first," I joked. Jane chuckled. "I know, right?" I sighed. "All right, I gotta try to get some sleep tonight. Last night was fucking awful." "Yeah? I slept like a baby last night. These soundproofing things rule." She slept like a baby. The image in my head of her sitting up in her bed replayed and gave me chills once again. Clearly, I must be mistaken. I shook off the thought. "Well, I still need to get used to it. Good night, Jane." "Hear you later, Lee." That corny son of a bitch. She was serious about doing those jokes every day, wasn't she? I heard her get up and make her way to bed. A few minutes later, and her side fell quiet. I crawled into my bed, and I once again stared into the dark. Sleep still wasn't coming easy. I dreaded this, but this time it only took about an hour to fall asleep, of which I was grateful. The silence still unsettled me. Suddenly I awoke, still in the darkness, even deeper now. I don't know what woke me up, but when I checked the clock, it was 2 a.m. I wasn't happy. I tried to fall back to sleep, and it was slowly working until I heard it again. That same deep bed creak, that unmistakable sound of someone sitting up. Now I was fully awake. Minutes passed and I heard nothing else. Same as before, like she was just sitting there. This time, however, I just had to know. I was confused, concerned, and pretty creeped out, so I just leaned close to the wall and whispered, "Jane." Nothing happened at first, but then I heard the bed very slowly begin to creak again, agonizingly slow and subtle. It sounded like she was turning, or at least adjusting her position in some way. I heard what sounded like her hands touching the wall, splayed out far apart on either side of me, and then I heard her breathing. I could only hear her breathe before when we were sitting back to back against the wall, so she must have been pressed right up against it. Her breathing sounded different this time, though. It sounded hollow, like she had a cold. I was petrified. The hair on the back of my neck was standing on end. What was she doing? Was she even awake? What must she look like right now? I just stared at the wall, imagining her on the other side, pressed up against it like some feral thing. Was this really happening? Am I just too tired and loopy to be able to tell? Maybe the creaking was her laying back down, and she's just breathing heavier than normal because she's asleep. I wanted to rationalize this so badly. I waited for something else to happen, some other sound. I waited hours, but nothing did, and I was too scared to say anything else. Was she still there? Was she pressed against the wall all night long? I tried to get a little bit of sleep. I managed maybe 45 minutes, but it was not pleasant. I couldn't focus on work the next day. I was tired, and I was so creeped out by what happened. I couldn't think of an explanation, but I knew there had to be one. There had to be something. I couldn't get the image out of my head, and every time that image replayed, she looked a little bit less human. I pictured her smiling a grotesque, toothy grin. I imagined her drooling, her eyes open as wide as saucers, her fingers long and bony caressing the wall. None of this was rooted in reality. I knew that, but I couldn't help but think of it. I got back home, and this time I hesitated before doing my customary knocks on the wall, but I did, and she returned them, same as always. I was just thinking, mankind has made a lot of great inventions. Jane. But the dry erase board has to be the most remarkable. I laughed. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to laugh at her jokes today, but I did. She's still Jane. At least she seems to be. I was way overthinking. That one's pretty good, I can't lie. You like it? She asked, sounding proud of herself. I do. Hey, I have to ask you something, though, I said, trying to remain at least somewhat casual. Shoot! Do you sleepwalk? The other side went silent for a minute. No, never in my life, she responded, instantly sounding unnerved. I fell silent too. I didn't know how to explain, but she continued. That's a scary-ass question to ask out of nowhere. Did you hear something? I heard. I don't know exactly what I heard. Stop. Don't talk like that. Is this revenge for the corny jokes? I'll stop the corny jokes. Don't do this to me. She pleaded in a half-joking manner. No, I promise I'm not messing with you, and it's probably nothing. It's just, you didn't get up at all last night, or the night before? No, I did not get up at all. Please tell me what you heard, she said firmly. I told Jane everything that happened. I tried to be delicate, but also honest. I trusted that she didn't know what was going on. That became evident to me by how freaked out she seemed. I know it sounded crazy. I just hoped she didn't think I was messing with her. It was difficult to tell from her tone. Initially, she wanted to debunk it all, saying that I must have heard something else, which I admitted could very well be true. Nevertheless, she told me she was going to stay with her sister for the night. Probably a good idea. She gave me her phone number and told me to call if anything happened. That put my mind at ease about whether or not she trusted me. I told her to be safe, and she tried once again to reassure me that it was probably nothing, but I felt a sense of immense dread as soon as she left. Suddenly, I really didn't want to be alone here. That night was the quietest of my life, and not in a good way. I thought about drowning it out by putting on some music or a movie, but nothing felt right. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to sleep that night, but eventually I managed. I ended up having a dream about a woman wearing a veil. Through the veil, I could vaguely make out 3 large black holes where her eyes and mouth should be. I couldn't recall anything that happened in the dream, only the image of that woman. I wondered if that was my subconscious way of trying to visualize Jane. I still didn't know what she actually looked like, so maybe my brain had trouble coming up with distinct features for her. Or maybe it was something else entirely. It was still dark when I awoke from the dream. I felt a deep unease as I checked the time. 2 a.m. again. This time, I wasn't eager to fall back to sleep. I didn't want to see the veiled woman again, so I stayed up a little while longer, attempting to ease my mind. I thought of every possible way to reassure myself. Eventually, I began to fall into a facade of comfort until... Creak. I went ice cold. Number, this can't be. I didn't just hear that. It was that same sitting up creak. But I heard Jane leave. Could she have come back late while I was sleeping? Maybe. But what if it isn't her? What if it was never her? My mind raced. So many improbable scenarios played out in my mind. None of them were good. Was someone else in there with her the whole time and she didn't know? Someone hiding away, only coming out when she's sleeping? Was that creak her sitting up or someone else sitting down? Do they watch her sleep? All I knew for sure was that someone was on the other side of this wall, because I could hear them breathing again. I wanted to do something. I wanted to know for sure. But I was powerless. Calling out to it last time was the most horrific mistake of my life. I didn't want to try that again. I wanted to call Jane, but I was afraid of making a sound. Instead, I just waited and listened. I was in a petrified daze, hyper alert, but also completely exhausted. My body wanted to shut down, but my brain wouldn't let me. It may have been minutes, or it may have been hours, I couldn't tell. The image of the veiled woman kept reappearing in the back of my subconscious. Eventually, I decided to call Jane. If I heard a phone ring on the other side, then I would know. I typed the number in and hit call. The number you are trying to reach is not in service. What? How could that be? Suddenly, cutting through the silence was a sound I had become very familiar with, and yet was the one sound I was the least prepared for. Knock, knock. A wave of shock shot through me. It was our knock. I didn't dare respond. If that isn't her, that means whoever it is has been listening to us. Now they're reaching out to me. They know I can hear them. But what if it's just her? She came back and was trying to see if I'm still awake. The thoughts whirled around like a hurricane. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear the silence. I couldn't bear the uncertainty. It was all too much. I got up, I grabbed my keys, and I left. As I walked out into the hallway, I saw her door. It looked the same as it always has, but to me, right now, it was a portal to hell. Someone, or something, was on the other side of that door. It might be pressed up against it. It might be looking out the peephole at me. I darted away. I simply couldn't be here anymore. I got outside, and suddenly, I could breathe again. The noise of the bustling city greeted me like an old friend. I never thought I would find such comfort in it. I sat down on a bench in front of my building. I wasn't going to go back, not while the sun was down. I knew where my window was, so I knew where 402's window was. I didn't want to look at it, but I had to. It was completely black. I couldn't see anything inside. That was good, I thought. But that didn't stop me from feeling like I was being watched. I felt eyes up there looming over me. I couldn't rationalize it, but something inside was telling me that whatever was in 402 wasn't a person. I fought against that thought for a long time, but I was starting to accept it. I tried my best to ignore it all. It wasn't easy. Eventually I laid down on the hard wooden slats and was able to some much-needed shut-eye. I slept better than the last few nights. I called in sick to work the next morning. I wanted to be here when Jane got home, or to see if she was already home, and last night was a massive overreaction. I felt safer seeing the sunlight beaming through my windows when I got back inside. I tried to occupy myself by catching up on some household chores, as the back of my mind waited anxiously for the next sound. I heard nothing all day. The longer it went on, the more sure I became that Jane wasn't home. As the sun set, it was apparent that she decided to stay with her sister for another night, meaning that yesterday night definitely wasn't her. Also meaning that I was here alone for another night. I tried calling again. I don't know why I expected the outcome to be different. Still wasn't in service. I made extra sure I got the number right. It was exactly the number she said. Why would she give me the wrong number? Was it a new phone and she got it wrong by accident? Or did what I said to her really freak her out and maybe she thinks I'm not to be trusted? She placated me with a false number and then got the hell away from me. That outcome would have hurt the most. But a third idea crept into my mind too. The idea that maybe she couldn't be trusted. I vehemently resisted that idea. Night fell and the dread came with it. Part of me wanted to go outside to the bench again, but another part of me had to hear it one more time first. One more time to confirm that it was still in there, and then I could call the cops, because this needed to end. I don't know why the noises always seem to start at 2 o'clock, but that's what I was waiting for. As 1:59 turned over, my senses sharpened. I waited, and I waited, expecting that sit-up sound. Only it didn't come. I had hoped that not hearing it would put my mind at ease. But that was not the case. It only put me more on edge. I felt like I was being watched. I felt like the thing on the other side knew I was listening. I couldn't hear anything, but I could feel the presence. It was there. I knew it. I just needed confirmation. The longer the silence went on, the more doubt began to creep in. The doubt infuriated me. All of this was doubt. Every second of this nightmare was doubt and possibility and maybe. I knew nothing. Nothing made sense. I was afraid and I was frustrated. So, I made a decision. I stood facing the wall, carefully picking up my phone in one hand and my keys in the other, ready to run and dial 911 at a moment's notice. I gathered up all the courage I had and prepared to speak. I had to call out to it. I had to know that I wasn't crazy. I opened my mouth, but before the words could escape, "Lee!" A soft voice whispered through the wall, and it was Jane. She sounded further away, and her voice had a slight echo to it, but it was unmistakably her voice. "Jane!" The word fell out. My voice cracked. "Help me!" She sounded afraid, hushed, like she didn't want to wake something. "Jane, what's going on?" I had a million questions. I was frantic, but I quieted my voice to match hers. Suddenly, I was afraid to wake it up too. "Please help me, Lee." "How are you there?" "When did you get back?" I whispered, not covering my desperation. "I see it," she continued. A shiver went down my spine. "I'm going to call the cops right now. They'll be right there." It was the only solution I had. "I don't want to die." She fell silent after that, but I heard the breathing against the wall again. The hair on my arm stood on end. I was too scared to think straight, but I knew this wasn't right. It was her voice, but it couldn't have been her. "Knock, knock! Knock, knock! Knock, knock." I had enough. I ran out into the hallway and dialed 911. I told them there was an intruder. I kept it vague because vague is all I had. As I spoke, I kept my eyes on her door. I wouldn't let it out of my sight. If it left, I would see it. If it stayed, they would catch it. I hoped. They advised me to stay in my apartment and lock the door. I didn't listen. It took around 40 minutes for them to arrive. 2 officers arrived on my floor, and the building manager was with them with keys to let them into her unit. I think his name was Larry. Like I said, I forgot a lot of names and faces. He shot me a brief glare when he saw me standing there. I probably woke him up with all this. I wanted to get a glimpse into the room, but I was ushered away, back into my unit. My stomach was in knots with stress. I just wanted this to be over. I didn't know what to expect. Would there be shouting? Would I hear a fight? Would there be gunshots? A part of me had a feeling, a dreadful feeling, that they would get in there and they wouldn't find anything. Minutes passed. I waited and waited, but I couldn't hear anything from the wall. Not a peep. "Why aren't they going inside?" I thought out loud. Suddenly there was a knock at my door. I opened the door, and sure enough, it was the officers, flanked by Larry. They told me what I was afraid of. We searched the apartment, and we couldn't find any signs of someone living in there. "You went inside?" I questioned. I knew they didn't go inside. We searched the entire unit, up and down. There was no one in there. But if you hear anything again... After that point, I tuned out. I exchanged the default pleasantries and they went on their way. I couldn't find a shit to give in any of their words, and I was too frustrated and exhausted to search for it. I tried to get answers. Instead, I ended up with yet another question atop the pile. Why wouldn't they go inside? What did Larry tell them? I knew I wasn't getting any sleep that night. All I could do was sit on the bed and overthink. This was all bigger than I thought it was. Jane could have been in on it. Larry could have been in on it. The police could have been in on it for all I knew. I really didn't want to believe that Jane was in on it. The way Larry glared at me, maybe it wasn't "screw you for waking me up in the middle of the night." Maybe I stirred something up that I wasn't supposed to. Maybe the problem wasn't with Jane. Maybe there wasn't an intruder, a creature, or even a ghost. Maybe it was the room itself. As I sat and drove myself crazy with these theories, a new sound shot into my ear and sent my heart up into my throat. Some kind of rapid clacking sound, almost sounded like someone button mashing a controller, but not as plasticky. I jumped off the bed and the sound stopped. The room wasn't done with me yet. I had never heard this sound before. I couldn't place it at first, but once the initial shock wore off, I knew exactly what it sounded like. It sounded like teeth chattering. I didn't want to believe that's what it was. There are lots of things that sound similar to teeth chattering. If it was any other circumstance, I could easily debunk it as the place settling. Little rhythmic cracking of hard materials rubbing together, bending. But this isn't any other circumstance. I was frozen in fear once again. The images my mind involuntarily conjured up were instantly traumatizing. A wide, chattering, horse-like, bloody mouth upon a gaunt, sunken face. A naked man with hungry mouths strewn all over his body. A zipper made of teeth going all the way down a human head so it can open like a Venus flytrap. Those chattering mouth toys you get from a joke store, haphazardly sewn into human flesh. I pleaded for my imagination to stop, but it simply wouldn't. The mouth abominations. The veiled woman. The ghoulish watcher pressed against the wall. All my imagination. But imagination is powerful when reality is vague. One of them could be real, if this thing even has a form. Maybe it was just a shadow in the dark. The sounds began again. Now I heard scratching at the wall, not hard, not ferocious, little light scrapes, nearly inaudible, like it was just kind of picking at it or scribbling against it. It sounded like having a rat in the walls. I used to be afraid of rats, I thought. Now I would love nothing more than for this to only be a rat. The sound began to change. Those little scrapes and scribbles along the wall morphed somehow. I couldn't tell if it was just my tired mind changing them the way that my tired eyes could make the stucco ceilings move and warble, but the sound changed nevertheless. The scribbles began to sound breathy. They started sounding more like whispers than scribbles. The content of the whispers was indiscernible. My mind went to someone in a small padded room, sitting in a corner with their legs curled up to their chest, shaking and whispering incoherent gibberish to themselves. There was an almost hypnotic effect to the whispers. I resisted the urge to move closer to try and make out any words hidden in the almost silent muttering. I wouldn't have the opportunity to try, however, because suddenly a blood-curdling scream exploded through the wall. I almost leapt out of my skin. It wasn't just any scream, it was Jane's voice again. I had never heard a scream so horrific in my life, but it was enough to break me from the trance I was falling into. I grabbed my keys and ran outside as fast as I could. I spent another night on the bench outside, at least whatever was left of the night by this point. Even outside and far away from the room, sleep wouldn't come. The images I conjured were too horrific, and the sounds replayed over and over. The deep, frustrating, impossible uncertainty of the situation loomed over me heavily. As did the eyes that I still felt watching me from the window. I was terrified, and I felt truly alone. Morning came, and I felt the relative safety of the sun. It took a while for me to gain the courage to re-enter my apartment, but I did. Then I went to work like always. Despite all this, despite being scared out of my mind, sleep-deprived, and feeling like I'm going insane, life doesn't care. The world keeps turning. I still got to eat. If this monotonous routine wasn't already so deeply ingrained into me, I might have had a full psychotic break by now, but my body was on autopilot. Plus, I didn't like being home anymore, even in the daytime. Last night was too much. I didn't go home right away after work. I delayed as much as I could. I thought about staying somewhere else, but if Jane was back, and if she really was the friend I thought she was, I had to be there to warn her about the thing that uses her voice. There was also one more thing that compelled me to come back. A breadcrumb I had to follow. I got into my building, but instead of heading up to the 4th floor, I went straight into the front office. I hated this little room. Unkempt, smelly, with a thick hum of fluorescent light tubes. Luckily, he was still there, head down in some papers. I knew he had to have some kind of answers for me. He had to know something. "Larry, you got a minute?" I asked, trying my best to put some extra bass into my voice. "It's Mike." "Fuck." "Don't worry about it," he replied with a slight chuckle, then looked up to meet my gaze. When he saw me, his expression slightly changed. "Ah, have a seat." He seemed to be expecting this visit. He knew something. I could see it in him. I took the only seat without papers and envelopes all over it. "What can I do for you?" he asked. I had so many questions, but I wanted to choose the simplest and most broad one to start, just to see where he takes it. Only 4 words popped into my head right away. "What's wrong with 402? Mike gave me a half-hearted grin. He knew this was coming. "Look, kid, maybe it would do you good to just get out of there for a while, okay? Stay with a relative or something." "What are you talking about?" I responded, bewildered. "You know, city life. It's not for everyone. It drives us all a little crazy sometimes. I know I love to go camping every now and again with the old lady. Once or twice a summer, get away from all this. It just gets your mind right." I saw through his words, and I knew that he could read on my face that I wasn't accepting them. "Tell me what's wrong with 402. Mike sat back in his chair and let out a deep sigh. "I don't know." He said that like it was an answer, but he continued before I could press him. "I wish I knew. It's just one of those things." "It's just one of those things," I repeated, immediately put off by his tone. "Okay. I don't really like to talk about it. I try not to. I find that's best." He paused, took a few seconds to find the words, then continued. "People don't do well in 402, meaning they get scared and they leave or, you know, whatever. I don't know what it is, and I'm not a superstitious type. There's just something wrong with it. That's all I can say," he explained. His body language changed. I saw him begin to fidget with his hands. "Did anything happen in that room?" I questioned. He took another big sigh. "A lot of calls to the police, like yesterday, thinking there's an intruder, a man in the closet, a man under the bed, things like that, spook house things. That's how it started. It all sounded like nonsense. Of course, police find nothing every time. We get the place tested for a gas leak or what have you. Nada. So we carry on. What more can I do, right?" A shockwave shot through me as he said all this. I was stunned. This was the first kind of confirmation I had gotten about any of this. It's all real. All of it. It's not just me. He continued. Then things start getting worse. People started doing things to themselves. You know what I mean? They started carving themselves up. Paramedics would be in and out. It was getting really bad. Sarah, my wife, she cleans the rooms up for new tenants. They were in and out of 402 all the time, so she was in there a lot. One day, she tells me she can't go in there anymore. I ask why, she says, because something is watching her. She says it knows her. She says something terrible is going to happen in there. I don't know what to make of that, but she never went into 402 again. She doesn't even like going near the door because she thinks there's someone at the peephole. Then, there was the disappearance. That girl went missing. You heard about that, right? I was ashamed to admit that I didn't. Maybe it came up. Maybe at one point I was told, but it was long since forgotten. They presumed her dead, never found her. Oh, I knew it had something to do with the room, so I closed it for good. Nobody in or out unless absolutely necessary. I didn't know what to say. I was horrified. What must all of these people have seen? I shuddered to think. But also, I still had questions. This sounded right, but there were glaring inconsistencies. I had to keep prodding. How did you get the police to go along with that? I asked first, attempting to remain composed. I didn't. They do their business. They're in and out quick. They never find anything, and they don't really ask. It's the city. No, but they didn't go inside the room last night. Why didn't they go in? Mike shot me a confused look. They did go in. They went in, they searched. They found nothing like they always do. New guys, it's been a few years, but none of them do. I was getting frustrated again. Things weren't lining up. Why are you lying? Why lie about this? I know they didn't go in. I would have heard them if they went in. I hear everything that happens in there. And you clearly didn't close the room because you rented it out. It's occupied right now. And Jane said you told her about previous tenants when she moved in, so there were people even before her. Mike's expression completely dropped. You think someone lives there right now? Yes. Someone lives there. Don't lie to me, I asserted. No one has lived there for 8 years, I promise you, he said coldly. I was boiling over. I lost my composure entirely. Someone lives there. Jane lives there. We both know damn well she does. I've spoken to her almost every day since she moved in. I've heard her cook. I've heard her clean. I've heard her shitty music. She's my friend, and she's in danger living in this fucking room, and you just let her go on in for what? Your bottom line? You really needed that extra rent money? What, for your camping trips? Mike raised his voice to match mine. Listen, buddy, I don't know what to tell you. Nobody lives in that fucking room. I won't allow it. You want to go see for yourself? Here. Mike rummaged around his desk and threw a set of keys at me. You have at it. Go have a look. It's an empty fucking room. And after you see that it's an empty room, do the smart thing. Don't stick around. Don't go inside. Lock it back up, then pack your shit and get out because your room isn't safe anymore. I was stunned. I was angry. I was confused and slightly ashamed. I had no more to say, so I turned to leave. But then he spoke up one more time. Oh, and by the way, you really are shit with names because Jane, that's the name of the girl who went missing. Jane Lewis. My whole body went numb as I walked out. This couldn't be the truth. I couldn't have been talking to a dead person this whole time. I had guessed that this thing was using her voice somehow, but that was only at night. It can't have all been fake. Jane was my friend. I couldn't believe it. I refused to believe it. That walk up to my floor was the longest of my life. I approached 402 with the key in my hand. I stopped in front of the door. I stood for what felt like hours. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Not right now. The thought of opening that door, even for a moment, especially at night, was far too horrifying. I had to sit down and collect myself. I went inside my apartment and immediately sat on my bed. I wanted to cry. This was all too much. But all I could do was sit and shiver in silence until... Knock, knock! I didn't have time to be startled, as a familiar voice immediately accompanied the knocks. Hey, I'm back. I stayed an extra night. I bet you loved the peace and quiet. Anything happen? You didn't call, so I'm hoping we're all good. You gave me quite a scare. Jane, in her normal, casual, optimistic Jane voice. I wanted to be able to trust her so badly. I needed a friend right now, and she made it so easy to trust her. So easy. How do I talk to her? What could I say? I couldn't find the words. You there? She asked calmly. Your number. It said it was out of service. I muttered, weakly. Really? What the hell? Are you sure you typed it in right? Yeah, I'm sure. I couldn't put any energy behind my voice. Are you okay? What happened? She responded, sounding genuinely concerned. You know, don't you? Know what? You're part of it. You're this thing. What are you talking about? Lee, you're not making sense. Is your name really Jane? Well, yeah, obviously. Why wouldn't it be? Jane Lewis. The wall fell silent for a moment. What the hell? Are you looking me up or something? That's messed up, Jane said, sounding shaken. Maybe I should look you up. Maybe I should, since you're dead. What the Lee, you're scaring the shit out of me. Okay, I think you need some help. I lost my composure again. You're dead. You died. Jane Lewis died. So who the fuck are you, and why are you doing this to me? I'm not dead. Why are you saying I'm dead? She shouted. She sounded so convincing. Maybe she genuinely didn't know she was dead. Or maybe this was another trick. Your apartment is vacant. Nobody has lived there for 8 years. It's empty. You aren't real. I heard her laugh. That kind of exasperated laugh when you hear something so ridiculous your brain has trouble processing it. It was a very human-like response. Lee, that's not true. I don't know who's telling you this shit, but it's not true. I can assure you, I am real. I signed a lease. I have a fucking parking spot. I just went to see my sister and my nephew. We played Mario Kart and ate pizza. Pretty sure I wasn't a ghost to them. Listen to yourself. You're in your own head. I am real. I am your friend. At least I'm trying to be. Her voice began to crack at the end. I could almost hear the tears welling up. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I began to cry. She was trying to pull me back to a reality I had drifted so far from. God, I wanted everything she said to be true. Across the wall, I could hear a few quiet sobs. It was so real. It had to be real. You're really scaring me. If this is a game, please just stop. It's sick. I'll leave. I'll pack my shit and I'll leave. Just please stop. My heart broke. I never wanted this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Jane. I don't know what's happening with me. Nothing makes sense. The building manager told me all this shit, and I don't know what's real anymore. I need help. I almost let it all go. I almost convinced myself that I had totally lost it and it was all in my head. It would have been so easy. All the pieces would fit together if none of it was real. But I had one more idea. I have a phone. Like I said to her, maybe I should look her up. If she went missing, there would be reports. All I have to do is type in her name. Jane Lewis, plus the name of the city. Enter. My heart sank further than I thought it could. There she was. The article came up immediately, and I saw her face for the first time. But I didn't think she was lying. Not on purpose, anyway. Those tears couldn't be fake. I refused to believe it. She really doesn't know. She's still stuck in that room, thinking she's alive. I looked at her picture for a while. So different from the ones my mind conjured up when we spoke. But her face fit her voice and personality like a glove. It radiated positive energy. The image of her in my mind was replaced with this new one instantaneously. Something about being able to attach the voice to the face made me trust her 10 times more. I knew this was really her, in some form. I wasn't being tricked. I was certain. I didn't know if I should tell her that she was dead. A part of me thought there wouldn't be a point. There's no way she would believe me. But I felt like I had to. No more secrets. I needed this all out in the open. Whatever happens. Jane, I said hesitantly. I looked you up. I'm looking at the article right now. Lee, please, she begged. I continued and began reading the article aloud. Jane Adrian Lewis, 26. Last seen October 12th, 2015. Reported missing October 14th, 2015. Declared dead October 14th, 2022. Multiple searches turned up no leads. The initial suspect, ex-boyfriend Devon Aronson, whom had at the time been serving a restraining order from Jane, was exonerated. Her sister Carrie and mother Lynn continue to urge the public to come forward with any information they may have. I recited coldly, trying not to break. Jane was loved by her family, friends, and community, and is described as a kind soul, funny, passionate, and selfless. Her entrepreneurial spirit led her to start up multiple small businesses, dating all the way back to 8 years old when she would make and sell beaded bracelets and homemade baked goods to her classmates. Her mother, Lynn, quotes, I stopped myself. This was a lot to throw at her, and I think she got the point. She was silent for a minute, and then she spoke. October 12th, 2015. Yes, 8 years ago, last month, that was the last time you were seen. 8 years ago. Yeah. October 12th, 2015 is today, she said. You're telling me I go missing today. Everything turned upside down once again, I stammered. Words struggled to form. She was living out her final days all over again somehow. Nobody remembers the stupid bracelets. Only my mom remembers that shit, she continued. I'm sorry. It's not true. You're sick. You've been stalking me, gathering all this information. What the fuck do you want? She screamed. There's a video. Can I play it for you? She went silent. I took that as a yes. I turned the volume up, held the phone to the wall, and hit play on the embedded video. An older woman and a younger woman stood together in front of microphones on the front lawn of a small house. I could only assume her mom and her sister. She wouldn't accept it from me, maybe she would accept it from them. Her mum didn't get through 2 sentences before I heard the most horrific sound I had ever heard coming from the other side of the wall. It sounded like all the air was sucked out of her, while at the same time she screamed and wailed. It was like the scream I heard the day before. All she could say was, "No," over and over again. I heard her rocking back and forth on the bed. It hit. She believed. "I'm sorry!" I cried. But all I could do was wait and listen to her violent sobbing, her awful cries. I couldn't imagine what she must be going through. After a few minutes, the crying stopped and she spoke through her sniffles. "Read me more." "There has to be more." I obliged and continued skimming the article. The words, "an early prominent lead," jumped out at me, and I read the paragraph out loud. Jane's older sister told police about conversations the two had the day prior to her disappearance. Jane talked about making friends with a neighbour named Lee. I paused. The last thing I expected was my name to appear in this, albeit spelled wrong. My heart began to pound, and I continued. "Whom she claimed she could hear through the unit's wall. However, when police searched, they found nobody by that name living in the building and weren't able to find any evidence of this mysterious Lee." "What the fuck?" Jane said, echoing my sentiments. You're alive. I'm really talking to you, 8 years ago," I surmised. It was the only way that could make sense. "I've been trying to tell you I'm fucking alive." "Wait, maybe that means I can help you. You're supposed to die today, but maybe I can save you." "Okay, how?" I thought about it for a second, and the most obvious answer popped into my mind. "Get out. Get out of the room. Now it's in the room. You have to leave." "What do you mean it's in the room?" "It's 4:02. Something bad is in 4:02. I hear it at night. You have to go right now. Stay with your sister." Okay, I'm going," she said frantically. I heard the bed shift as she began making her way off. Then I heard something else. "Wait!" I shouted. "Don't move." "What? Why?" "Don't step off the bed. Stay on the bed." "Why?" "It's breathing. I can hear it. It's under your bed." I softened my voice to a whisper, even though I didn't think it would do any good. "I can't hear anything." "It's there. It's waiting. Don't set your foot off." "What do I do?" I don't know. Just wait." "I don't want to die." "You won't. We'll figure this out." I paced around the apartment, frantically trying to put the pieces together to try and find some answer, some way I could save her. Then something struck me. "I don't want to die." She said that to me last night, when she wasn't here. It was the same words said in the same way, like her scream was the same scream. It wasn't this thing mimicking her, it was her. "I heard you when you weren't here." "How did I hear you when you weren't here? How did I hear you say something before you said it?" I asked, in desperate confusion. I don't know," she repeated. "You said those exact words before, the exact same way. It was you. I thought maybe it was using your voice, but it was you now. I don't understand. I don't know, Jane. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. This doesn't make any sense." "Time," she said in a softer voice. "What?" "I read this book a little while ago. It was a poetry book. It sounded like she was just talking to calm herself down, saying anything, thinking about anything, just going back to a happy place, anything to cope. It seemed like something she had to learn how to do." I let her continue while I searched my own mind for answers. One of the poems was about time, about how life is a cup, and time is water being slowly poured into the cup. I can't remember exactly how it went, but the stream of water is your present, and it all collects and fills up to become your past, she said. I heard her lay back on her bed. I pictured her staring at the ceiling, fingers interlocked, scared out of her mind, but trying her best to talk her way out of it. "I never heard that one," I replied. "It always feels like we're going somewhere, because we're in the middle of the pour, but when you look at the past, it's all in the same place. You can take a sip from any of it. I always liked that analogy for some reason. Maybe when we see ghosts, it's just time spilling, out of their glass, out into the world for all to see. Maybe that's why we see them most at night. It's easy to spill things when it's dark. Her voice slowly grew calmer. I listened, fearing deep down that this might be the last time I hear it. She kept going. I don't think I spilled. Maybe a little bit in the dark. Maybe that's what you were hearing. But I think I poured my time out. To you. I mixed up our glasses because I needed to. Maybe she was right. There's no way of knowing, but it is a nice thought. We mixed our time. I pictured a plain milkshake in a blender, but with a little chocolate swirl cascading into the center. Or maybe I just threw my whole glass at the fucking wall, she said, chuckling faintly. I smiled. That would do it. The thing in that room, maybe it spilled too. Spilled over here from someplace else, I surmised. The wall went silent. It was silent for a long time. Too long. Then the creak I had become so familiar with. She sat up. Jane, I shouted. I see it. Her breath was shaky. Her words were weak. It's with me now. Get out of there. Run. Just run, I shouted. I can't move. Please help me, Lee. Please. She begged. I couldn't take any more. I couldn't think any more. I took the keys Mike gave me, I grabbed a big kitchen knife, and I stormed out of the apartment as fast as I could. I didn't know what I would do or what I could do. I just had to get to her. Without hesitation, I plunged the key into the lock of 402 and burst through the door, letting it slowly close behind me. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I took in what I saw in the brief moments when the room was illuminated by the hallway light, and it was everything Mike said it was. Empty, completely empty, unkempt and unclean. The dust was thick. There was absolutely no mistaking the fact that this place was abandoned. Now, though, with the door closed, all of those details were replaced by a thick blanket of darkness. So dark, darker than my apartment ever was. I tried the lights, and they didn't come on. Jane! I shouted again as I walked further into the blackness, but there was no response. She wasn't here, but she was. She was on her bed, helpless, staring at something that was about to kill her. That was happening 8 years ago, but it was happening right now. I just couldn't see it. There wasn't even a bed here anymore. I stood right where it should be, and there was nothing. Please answer me, Jane. I should be able to hear her, I thought. I tried to even just feel her presence somehow, but I couldn't feel anything except dread. Was I too late? I called out to her again and again. Nothing. I turned my attention to her tormentor. Leave her alone. What are you? Show yourself. What the fuck was I saying? The adrenaline was too high. I didn't even fully realize the scope of the shit I was in, but it was beginning to dawn on me. This thing, it killed Jane. It torments people. It carves them up. And I just walked right into its mouth. I liked Jane's theory about time, but maybe it was this thing that did it. It mixed up our time. It put us together to lure me over here. 8 years without a victim, and it was starving. It knew we would connect. It knew I would come to save her. It got me right where it wanted me. In my adrenaline-fueled haze, I walked far away from the door without even realizing it. I was on the other side of the room. I could make a run for it, but I froze. The soundproofing panels were gone, but the place was just as silent. The intense dark made my vision fuzzy and grainy. Dark spots and subtle shapes manifested and dissipated, tricking my eyes. I tried to scan the room. All I could really make out was some of the basic geometry. The only light was an inch-tall line coming from under the front door. It could be hiding in any one of these pitch-black corners, standing there, watching me hyperventilate. There was a sliding closet door next to the front door, very slightly open. Mike said something about people seeing it in the closet. I could imagine its eye peeking out. Maybe that's where it hid in the daytime, watching Jane and listening to us. Something moved above me. I looked to the ceiling, but saw only black. It could be up there too, sprawled out on the ceiling like some kind of spider looking down at me, waiting to pounce. I wouldn't know. More movement in the far corners of my periphery. I turned to face it out of instinct and was again met with the void. I wanted to think it was all a trick of my eyes, but I knew better. I told my body to run. It was time to run. My body didn't want to move, but I had no choice. I couldn't stay here. As much as it killed me, I was quickly realizing there was no saving Jane. There never was. I was still as powerless as I had been this entire time, so I had to go. Now. Then I heard it. Creak. The floorboard right in front of the door I was so anxious to get to. I turned and looked towards the door and I saw it. The line of light under the door was now broken by two dark pillars. It was standing right there. It was too dark to make out any other features, or maybe it didn't have any. All I could make out was a shadow amongst the shadows. The vaguest confirmation of a form. My legs fell out from under me and I came down hard. I kicked my feet and crawled back against the furthest corner. I didn't take my eyes off of it. I didn't dare to even blink. It didn't move. After a moment, the floorboards began to creak subtly again and again, but it still wasn't moving. It sounded like it was only slightly shifting its weight from one foot to the other and back again. It was swaying. I really was trapped now. It wasn't going to let me get to the door. I put my hands on the wall behind me to help me push myself back up. One of my hands touched something wet. The wall was damp and squishy. Instinctually, I looked to see what I was touching, and my eyes were able to adjust enough to make out that it was mold. A ton of mold, coating several feet of the wall. I recoiled in disgust, but it quickly all started to add up. This mold was exactly where the mold in my apartment was. It was the same mold, on both sides. The guys who replaced my drywall, they never looked on the other side. But now that I thought about it, the day after they opened my wall was the day this all started. Opening the wall opened the threshold. That's how it must have found me. These revelations ripped through my mind within a few seconds, but the ultimate realization was that I took my eyes off of it. I quickly turned back. The line of light was unbroken again. It moved. It could be anywhere now. It was toying with me like it toyed with all the others. I began to feel my feet go numb, just like how Jane's did. I couldn't make a run for it anymore. This was it. It was coming for me. In my desperation, I took my knife and jammed it into the moldy wall. It slid in, so I stabbed it again and again and again. Then I dropped the knife and forced my hands inside, pulling and ripping and tearing at the decay. Some parts tore away easy, others were still rough and hard. Amidst the crumbling and the squishing sounds of the wall being pulled apart and the sounds of my own struggling, the creaks began again. Coming closer now. The tips of my fingers screamed in pain. My fingernails bent and broke as drywall lodged itself behind them, but I continued tearing at it with everything I had. It felt like I had an extra pair of hands. The creaks got closer. The numbness crept up my legs. The breathing I heard time and time again, I could now feel on the back of my neck. Then, that awful sound of teeth chattering inches away from my ear. Eventually, the hole was big enough for me to crawl into, and I hoisted myself inside with every bit of strength I had left. My body barely fit between the drywall and the solid concrete. I squeezed in as best as I could. I knew this wasn't an escape. This was just the only thing I could do. Maybe this would be far enough outside of its physical domain. Sound could travel past the wall, but maybe it couldn't. It was a stretch, but it's all I had. It was pitch black in here. I couldn't even see myself. I was at the whim of the warbling fuzz of my own retinas. It stopped moving, but it continued to breathe, right next to my ear. Maybe I was right, and it couldn't get inside. Time passed. The breathing faded. My heart rate began to slow, and the intense pain in my hands crept to the surface. I didn't know how long it had been, but it felt like ages. At this point, I was waiting for the sun to come up, but instead it stayed pitch black. I finally decided to take a peek outside of the hole just to see a glimpse of that line of light again. I reached my hand toward the edge of the hole to pull myself towards it, but I couldn't find it. I ran my hand along the whole surface. I couldn't find the hole. It was gone. It was like it was never there. The wall was perfectly smooth and solid. I began to hyperventilate again. Then I began to scream. I screamed for help until my throat went coarse. I hit the wall as hard as I could over and over, and it wouldn't budge. I couldn't see the blood, but I felt it trickle down my knuckles. I managed to dislodge a wooden stud, but that offered no help. I fought until I had no more fight left in me. Then I sat back, staring into the blackness once again, defeated. Only there was something different this time. I could only describe it as something darker than pitch black, a little fuzzy orb of it floating past the wooden stud that I broke off. I pulled myself closer, and my eyes very slowly began to adjust. It wasn't an orb, I began to discover. It was 3 orbs, arranged in an inverted triangle. I pulled myself closer again. No, not orbs. They were holes. I couldn't fully make it out until I was a mere foot away from it. Then I gasped in horror. A face. Sunken black holes for the eyes and mouth, withered and shrouded in a veil of cobwebs. I could barely make out the rest of the body. Slumped over and sitting like I was, decayed to bones. There she was, the veiled woman. But not just the veiled woman. It was Jane. She was here all this time. It probably tricked her into the wall the same way it tricked me. Tears welled up immediately and turned to frantic sobs. No, Jane, please, no. I thought I could save you. Please don't be gone. I knew she was dead, but actually seeing her like this broke me beyond repair. It sunk in now. That last glimmer of hope I had was gone. My friend is dead, and she died afraid. You can't be gone. Tell me one of your jokes. You're supposed to tell me them every day. You can't miss a day. You have to. Please. I was hysterical, thinking about her scared and alone and trapped for God knows how long, never being found. It shattered me over and over. I couldn't save her. I couldn't reassure her. I couldn't make things better. I couldn't say goodbye. I couldn't even bring her or her family closure because I was going, die in this place too. And neither of us would ever be found. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Give me more time. Spill me more time. Just a little more. I begged, but nothing happened. The next few hours were agony, staring at the empty, decomposed husk of the girl I failed, replaying every single decision I made, thinking about how I could have done it differently. I was always too late, always one step behind, too scared, too uncertain. I always knew I was like this, I always have been, but I didn't think it mattered. I figured the only life I could ruin was my own. I began doing our knocks on the wall, over and over, hoping maybe she would hear it, somewhere, sometime. Maybe it would reach her at a time when she needed to know someone was still with her. That's probably not how it worked, but it's all I had left. I was hungry, dehydrated. My lips were sticking together. My vision got even spottier. Occasionally I would sleep, as much as I could. I tried to move my arms and my body every now and then to stop them from becoming completely stiff, but they hurt like hell. 2 days passed. I continued knocking. I was in a haze when I saw an axe crash through the wall, bringing with it a beam of blinding light. It crashed through several more times. The light scorched my eyes. I heard a voice and yelling, but I couldn't discern it. Before long, I was being pulled out of the wall. The pain in my muscles was unbearable. My eyes wouldn't focus and my brain wouldn't unscramble. But I could think just enough to repeat, "Jane is in there," as I was dragged away before I completely lost consciousness. I awoke in a hospital room, once again blinded by all the light, but my eyes eventually focused on Mike. He told me he regretted giving me the key to 402 and came to check on me when he saw the key still in the lock. That's when he heard me knocking and he got me out. I told him I was grateful and that I was sorry. The police and the paramedics came and collected Jane's body. Mike told me what story to use to explain what happened. Say I heard some rats and took it upon myself to set traps in the wall when I got stuck and found Jane. It worked well enough for them. I got fired for missing work, which made me laugh, and it goes without saying that I had to find a new place to live. I went back to my apartment after I got discharged, gathered everything I could in about 20 minutes and left. Right before I shut the door, I knocked twice on the wall one more time. Just because. Jane's sister reached out to say thank you on behalf of her and her family. I wish I could tell them more, but there was no way. All I could do was wish them the best. I believe they're trying to sue Mike for criminal negligence. I struggled to find a new place and a new job. I got fired a few times for being too inattentive or slow. I wasn't sleeping or eating. I had panic attacks and night terrors. I couldn't bear the dark or the quiet. The things I saw I couldn't escape. But beyond the fear and the trauma, it was the guilt that was the worst. I saw her face everywhere. Her dead face haunted me while I slept, and her living face haunted me while I was awake. Neither face would ever forgive me. I didn't have enough money to drink away the sorrow. I was forced to face it all, every day. Dating was off the table. I wouldn't subject someone else to myself in the state I was in. I thought long and hard about giving up in those next few months. I got closer and closer to making that decision. I started stockpiling prescription pills and drafting final letters. I only felt more and more ready as the days passed. But on the day I chose, and the time I chose, I heard 2 knocks on my wall. The 60s were not kind to me, and my 80s aren't much better. When you get to be my age, which happens to be the ripe one of 82, and 4 months, but who's counting? You begin to realize that you only have a limited number of things to actually do, and despite all that money you stockpiled up, like those bunker nuts during the Cold War, and all that social security, your money really isn't worth jack shit. Right now, I'm sitting on a mound of cold, hard cash, and despite how sweet that may sound to a younger, less advanced, as they're calling us, person, I still have sores up and down my arse. I'll spare you the details, but again, when you're my age, you can only spend those dollars coming out of your crack in a few select places. Gambling on bingo night, Tuesdays and Thursdays, the tithing plate of the religious organization or denomination of your choice, scratch-off lottery tickets and a microwaved hot dog from the local gas station if the bus makes a pit stop, or buying superfluous knickknacks off those home shopping channels with your husband's credit card. Personally, I'm sick of the bingos, just fine with Father Myers' bi-weekly visits, prefer the microwaved junk from the cafeteria, and don't have a husband or a wife anymore. And also, don't bother ordering from the television. I simply just watch it, or at least I used to watch it. You would think that you'd never see the day that your television privileges were taken away after the age of, say, 6, but that show you love changes things, doesn't it? The first time I remember it coming on was the night of August 28th. It was a Thursday, and it was bingo night. Again, if memory serves, we'll get to that in a bit. I had just lost 28 bucks to Dan Rosenberg from room 94 and was sitting on my bed wondering why the hell I allowed myself to bet with a former attorney at law. The rule was unwritten, but we shook on it. No winning the easy way. Free space. Old Danny Boy swore up and down that we never agreed on such a term, and, even though the man's mind wasn't what it used to be, the wheelchair-bound shyster knew full well that he didn't have a leg to stand on. Unfortunately, I didn't either, and technically, B12, just like the vitamin, did complete his diagonal down. Suffice it to say, I was heated when I got back to my room, so much so that when the TV began blaring that crappy old music you'd hear if a tin can could whistle Three's Company, I immediately fumbled for the remote. The set itself is and was ancient by today's standards. A CRT boob tube that would zap you if you tapped the screen, complete with rabbit ears so tall you'd think you were seeing the friggin' Easter Bunny in late summertime. No matter what you played on the dopey thing, everything from those sleek cell phone commercials to The Godfather looked like a 70s porno. Not that I would know, of course. I was about to shut the hunk of junk off when the face of a gorgeous young woman, at least young to me, probably in her late 30s, caught my eye, and then the rest of her. She was folding the laundry and whistling something I couldn't quite make out, and as the machine beneath her leaning tower of clothes wobbled and shook a fresh load, the one on top of it did the same before the upper 6-odd shirts and blouses tumbled to the floor. I chuckled to myself as the laugh track played and I leaned back onto my pillow. Being a somewhat easy man to entertain, especially considering these days I only watch the news and traffic report, knowing full well my license is well past expired, mind you. I crossed my legs and turned up the volume. She was whistling Sharp Dressed Man by ZZ Top, a song choice that slowly began to make sense as soon as a casually dressed one, presumably her husband, entered the room in his boxer briefs. In one hand, he held a toothbrush that danced around between his lips. The other was empty, and he used it to slap the woman on the arse. I hate to date myself more than I already have, but back in my day, Lucy and Ricky slept in separate beds till 55, and then the Flintstones did it, and then, if a cartoon could, the rest would. And they did. Point being, watching a woman's ass get slapped on national television was something I never dreamed of seeing all those years of staring at reruns of Lash LaRue. But an old boy can dream, can't he? Yeah, well, apparently I must have been, because the next thing I knew I was seated upright with a pool of drool in my lap, staining my own boxers with saliva. "How'd we sleep last night, Mr. Benson?" The youthful voice of my nurse rang out and interrupted my thoughts. I couldn't see her, but if it were a day that ended in Y, she was stirring my crushed-up pills into a cup of applesauce. I thought about her question, and my lips parted into a grin. "Who's this we, Jessica?" "'Cause I slept like a baby." "That makes one of us," she said, puffing up my pillow and handing me the cup. "You still in that honours class?" She shook her head, turning down the television. I watched as the toothpaste commercial ended and That Show You Love started up again. "I am, but, well, not for long," she said, setting the remote on the nightstand with a little clack. The show was mid-episode, it seemed, and the wifely woman, her hair bunched up from bedhead, was kissing her husband goodbye as he lifted a briefcase and straightened his tie. Typical Americana. My eyes then snapped back to Nurse Jessica, back to reality, and there was the faintest look on her face that maybe Old Man Benson was finally losing it. You shouldn't quit so soon," I said. "It's only been a week." "A terrible week, Mr. Benson," she said as she approached me. "But don't you worry about that." She smiled. "I'll be fine." The woman on the TV over her shoulder was brushing her teeth in her pajamas now, the shower beside her running hot water as evident by the fog coating the mirror glass. She dropped the brush and it tumbled into the sink. I couldn't help but smirk at the slapstick and envision the Stooges doing the same, a laugh track echoing inside my head as if on cue at the fumble. I then turned my still grinning gaze back to Jessica. "I know you will," I said, and she took my expression as a sign of goodwill. "Good." Nurse Jessica cleared her throat. "As for you, Mr. Benson," she began, "but that's as much as I heard." Behind her, the woman on the boxed-in screen had taken off her pajama shirt, likely an oversized t-shirt of her husband's. She then began to pull the plush pajama pants down to her ankles and, clear as day, despite my cataracts, I could see her pale white ass and breasts in the mirror. "And that means a minimum of 8 hours of sleep," Jessica continued. I grabbed the remote she had placed onto the nearby nightstand and clicked the TV off in a scramble. She spun around, looking at her own reflection in the window-lit black void, and then turned back to me on her heel. I said, "I can't get 8 hours with the set on." The nurse wagged her head and continued. I didn't hear a word of it. When Jessica finally left, which was after a grueling 15 more minutes, that felt more like 4 hours, I lifted the remote from my lap and pressed my thumb to the little red button. The woman appeared on screen again, only now she was fully clothed and standing in the kitchen, her hair still wet from the shower. Nearby, a television of her own was playing, though it was far nicer than the quite literal boob tube that stood before me. I turned it up. "That's what I said," a woman's voice faded in, but you know, he didn't listen. I knew right away it wasn't the showered woman's voice. Hers was too busy laughing at the voice coming from her flat-screen TV. They were both in their respective kitchens, cutting some kind of leafy green on a chopping board. She was watching a cooking show. "I told him that," the woman on the cooking show continued. I now noticed there was a cell phone wedged between her shoulder and her ear, and the wet-haired wife listened along as she sliced the vegetable. This went on for a good 20 or so minutes until again I fell asleep. When I finally opened my crusted-over eyes, Nurse Jessica was standing over me with a dinner plate. It was dark outside the window, just to the left of the TV, and, on its screen, the woman and her husband were watching something themselves, though the angle was on them, and I couldn't see what it was. "Got your 8 hours in, Mr. Benson?" Jessica asked with a grin, setting the plate on the little swiveling tray before me. Meatloaf and corn. What time is it?" I groaned, sitting up a little. I hated corn. It always came out whole. 8:30. I sighed. "That's 9 hours today," I said. "A new record." Jessica shook her head as she salted the meatloaf. I did need my sodium after all. "If all I did was watch this all day," she said, her eyes lifting to the image of the couple on the couch, "I'd sleep for 9 hours too, Mr. Benson." She wished me a good night, and, as soon as she shut the door, I turned up the volume which she had taken the liberty of turning down, though there wasn't much to listen to. It was some kind of show that they were watching. None of the voices in it sounded familiar, but it sure kept their attention. I watched on as I forked down the meatloaf, avoiding that pesky yellow corn, until the couple stood, clicked off the program, and made their way off screen. There was a good 20 seconds where I simply stared at the empty living room. At first, I thought the cable box might have given out, or maybe there was a glitch, but before I had time to do anything about it, which wouldn't have been much, a new shot appeared. It was of their apparent bedroom, and Mrs. whatever her name was waltzing through the doorway seductively in some kind of lingerie. Her husband, in his boxers again, sat on the edge of the bed before standing up and approaching her. It was at that point when the two began passionately kissing, and the same point when I wondered what the hell kind of late-night channel I had accidentally been watching for the past 2 days. I hit the guide and was presented with, perhaps, an even stranger sight. The channel wasn't listed, but instead I was taken to the list of programs playing on channels 1 through 5 with the weather report in the corner. I clicked back on the show, and now the couple was on the bed, making out like bandits. I'll spare the details, but let me just say that it was the first time I had a stiffy since Janet Jackson's little wardrobe malfunction at the 2004 Super Bowl. Despite my little excitement, however, I figured it was neither the time nor place to be watching the After Hours channel, much like when Mum would catch Harry and I on the living room rug watching The Twilight Zone instead of Captain Kangaroo when he was 6. God forbid that Snoop Dan Rosenberg should point his pointy little nose through the crack in my door and see me watching this, not to mention Nurse Jessica. So I turned off That Show You Love, shook my head, and leaned back onto my pillow. The image of the couple never left me that night, and I couldn't fully tell if what I was feeling was a bit of libido, a bit of the creeps, or something in between. Regardless of my feelings, however, the show had me hooked, line and sinker. I didn't even know the characters' names or any of the plot, but still I felt compelled to watch it. It was that slice-of-life bullshit that Amy always loved. Of course, minus the gratuitous sex. It truly was that show you love. That show that I now loved. After indecisively rolling back and forth beneath the covers, I grabbed the remote between my legs and clicked the little red button again. Immediately, my finger dashed to the volume control, pressing it until the number in the upper right-hand corner virtually became 0, but the effort was of little need. The couple was asleep, and not a sound emanated from the television other than the white noise that scratched at my ears. I stared on, like a voyeuristic swine, for a good 3 confused minutes until I, myself, drifted off into dreamland. When I came to, again with a streak of spit along my chin, Nurse Jessica was hoisting me up and onto the bus. It was Saturday, which meant activity day, and for a group of geezers that could barely walk, not to mention sit up straight, the outings usually included bowling, if we were feeling frisky, the local indoor shopping mall, and by mall I mean food court, or the grocery store. You wouldn't think that putting a box of Raisin Bran into a wheeled steel cage would classify as a fun Saturday outing, but the alternative, watching The Price is Right for 8 hours while thinking about all the grandkids you comparatively didn't have, paled in comparison. Before Jessica escorted me to the bus, however, in that half-awake, half-asleep twilight that a yawn usually snaps you right out of, I watched as the woman on That Show You Love kissed her husband goodbye, only this time it was she that, leaving the house in a bright yellow blouse, purse hung from her shoulder. The next shot, which looked to be about the same from the intro of the show with that jolly jingle, was of the house itself, as the woman shut the front door and strut to her car. As the shot slowly widened, the stark white mailbox drifted into view, reading, plainly, Johnson. Finally, I thought, I have a name. I continued thinking about the show all the way to the mall, and, when we had finished eating in the food court, many of us, especially Fat Joe, as we called him, got the hankering for the supermarket. So, we went, at least the bus went. And as it pulled up, like a shot out of Night of the Living Dead, another program Mom wrung my neck for watching, we shuffled into the fluorescent gleam of aisles upon aisles of processed junk food, heaven for those of us that weren't quite there yet. As I spun my cart into aisle 3 to grab myself a handful of cheesy puffs in that 10-gallon drum, my feet squeaked to a stop faster than my brain ever could have. Standing at the end of the aisle and reaching for a jar of peanut butter on her toes was the woman from That Show You Love, that same wifely woman. Of the few times I had seen it, I had never suspected the show to be that of a local broadcast, not to mention that members of the cast were actually residents of Des Plaines, Illinois. I had never met anyone famous in my life up to that point, maybe besides sharing a connecting flight with one of the members of Frankie Valli's Four Seasons, and because of that, I had also never felt that, as they call it, butterflies feeling. That feeling when you get starstruck. While my stomach wasn't exactly fluttering at that moment in time, it was, in some manner, a bit uneasy. And it probably wasn't the food court either. I couldn't help my cold feet as I approached her, but maybe due to the intimacy I had seen her in on screen, I felt somewhat comfortable tapping the stranger on the shoulder with my brittle fingers. She spun around, clutching the last jar, and I extended a warm smile. "Hello, young lady," I said, nodding my head. She was more stunning in person. Hello," she replied, mirroring my same gesture. We stood silently as the hum of the overhead speakers played some kind of saxophone crap. I cleared my throat, but before I could speak, she continued, Were you looking for this, sir?" I followed her eyes down to the peanut butter. "No," I said. "No, ma'am." She nodded silently at me. For a starlet, she was rather shy. "I just wanted to say that I'm a big fan." Her eyes narrowed and brows furrowed, looking at me as if I were bug-eyed. "A big fan?" she asked, shaking her head. "Of?" I chuckled. "Your show." The woman, smile faded from her cheeks, continued to shake her noggin. "I'm sorry, sir. You must have the wrong woman." "You don't have to be coy," I said, raising a hand, realizing her in-person modesty. "I just wanted to tell you that your work has made an old man very entertained." I nervously huffed. The woman looked down the aisle to either side and, when she saw that no one was around, stepped a bit closer to me. "What work?" Now my smile was gone too, and my voice deepened. "You play Mrs. Johnson on That Show You Love." The woman's face drained of all its colour and her cheeks hollowed out. She just stared at me for a good 30 seconds in that aisle, the jar of peanut butter close to bursting between her fingers. "Mister," she finally said, in a hushed, low tone, "I am Mrs. Johnson." I licked my lips and started to shake my head. "But you're—" She stopped me. "I'm not on TV." We stood silently across from one another until she set the jar back on the shelf and paced down the aisle, occasionally looking over her cold shoulder at me until she disappeared behind a wall of marshmallow bags. Then it hit me in her absence. She had been wearing the same yellow blouse and shoulder-hung purse from this morning's episode. Perhaps I was having an episode of my own. That night, I simply stared at the black void screen of the television set, never once turning it on. I couldn't sleep, even despite the warm milk Nurse Jessica had given me. I was chilled to the brittle bone. Eventually, when the darkness outside faded into the glow of an orange-yellow sunrise through the curtains, I mustered up the strength to press once again that little red button. The button my finger had been resting on all night but was too timid to dare push. The TV flashed on. I had winced in expectation to see the woman and her husband, perhaps in bed or making an early breakfast. Instead, the shot was of their bedroom. Yes, but on top of their covers, as opposed to the couple being under them, were two thick suitcases. Mr. Johnson, as he might have been called, was continually looking around the house, back and forth, and tossing clothes and neckties and black suit pants into the zippered bag. At times, he stared straight into the camera, which was apparently and in some way hidden from his view. Mrs. Johnson, indeed the woman I had seen in that aisle at the grocer, was frantically yelling something at him. I cautiously turned up the volume. "I just don't know how it's possible, honey," her husband said, flailing his arms. "I looked all night, couldn't find a single one." "I know what he said," she snapped back. "It's completely crazy. But how the hell did he know?" "He was probably just an old pervert," her husband replied, shoving something into a bag. "I think I'll give that Sunny Gardens a call. That's what it said on the bus, right?" "Right." "Oh shit," I thought to myself. And that shit, which proverbially hit the fan that night, came in the form of that single solitary word that none of us here at Sunny Gardens ever wanted to hear. Not even Dan Rosenberg next door. No, not even him. It was a word that meant those funny looks in the lobby, the extra pills to swallow, and the rigid visitation rights. Not that anyone was visiting me anyway. Dementia. "It's just a precaution," Nurse Jessica said, as she crushed the new medication into my applesauce, stirring it alongside the others. She probably thought I was crazy, just like everyone else, not only for the phone call that the home had anonymously received about a certain old man in a stained wife-beater, but also because I had requested her to close the curtains and keep them shut, even during the day. The sunlight would still bleed into the room, but without the glow of the TV, whose remote was now hidden from me, the only other source of light was that of the lamp on the nightstand. She handed me the cup, and I instinctively lifted the cold steel of the spoon. "Do you think I'm nuts, Jessica?" "Of course not," she shook, but I could tell she was lying. "You just need a little extra care right now, Mr. Benson." I thanked Jessica, unable to convince her that I wasn't loony, and let her wrap up her shift for the night. About an hour later, just as I was about to sit silently and stare into the voided screen that reflected my face back to me, there was a knock at my door. "Come in," I said with a strained voice, and in stepped one of the assistant nurses, Nurse Becky, if memory serves. She smiled, but it was a nervous one. Everyone around here thought I had, somehow, fled my covers by the cover of night and went to play Peeping Tom down the street. Come to find out, the Johnsons had only lived a couple of blocks from the home. "Mr. Benson," she said, somewhat clunkily, "you have a visitor." I snapped my head to face her. "I do." She nodded, and from behind her stepped in a woman I had never seen before, a smiling brunette woman. "I'll let you two be alone," she said, and ducked into the hallway. The woman approached my bed, and I sat up hastily, pulling the covers up to my chest. I stuttered. "Do I know you?" She extended a pink envelope and a pink gift baggie toward me in either hand. "Probably not," she said in a tired voice. But she wasn't right. Though I had never met this woman, that voice of hers sounded eerily familiar. As I watched her hands tremble, still upholding the gifts, suddenly it clicked. She was the woman on Mrs. Johnson's TV in her kitchen. I had done a lot of cheap dope in my heyday, but this was way worse. "Wait," I said gruffly. "Don't you run a cooking show?" She shook her head, and then shook the gifts in her hands. I took the card and unwrapped it. It was one of those get-well-soon ones with the little puppy on the front, a thermometer in its mouth. I looked at the woman as I opened it and could see, in the lamplight, that she must have recently been crying. Her eyes were sunken and puffy red. Inside the card, written in black ink, was a note. It read, rather bluntly, "Stop looking through windows, Roger." The woman then set the baggie on my lap and, without another word, left the room. I sat in silence for a moment, the opened card still in my hands, and then placed the card on my stomach and lifted the little baggie, opening it. Inside, there was a television remote wrapped in a newspaper, another television remote, strikingly similar to the one the home had hidden from me. I aimed it at the box and pressed the same coloured red button. That Show You Love, rather, That Show I Once Loved, came on, and on screen was a different sight. A different house entirely, as a matter of fact. Seated at a desk and punching something into a laptop was a young woman with long, wet, jet-black hair. I immediately clicked the set-off again with a quivering hand. I didn't even need to see her face to know who it was. It was Nurse Jessica. I still haven't told her. See, that newspaper that wrapped the remote in the baggie? It wasn't only there for fluff's sake. Come to find out, on the page stamped with the number 16 at the very tip-top with all the other classifieds was an advertisement for a modest suburban home, one that looked all too familiar. But that wasn't all. On the back page, at the very bottom, were 2 Have You Seen Me bulletins. I think you can figure out whose faces were in those pictures. I keep my curtains drawn, even now, unless I want it to be curtains for me too. If the woman who had stood in this very room that night, holding that card and baggie in her hands, had been being watched by Mrs. Johnson, and I had been watching her, then who the hell's been watching me? I got that answer last night. I was up in bed and reading an Agatha Christie novel. All I can do now without the company of the boob tube. Not that I want it anymore. When there was a knocking at my door, it was Nurse Jessica. Just as I had every time since I saw her black locks on that damn screen, I winced and curbed that reaction into a smile. Mr. Benson? Yes, Jess. She smiled and extended an envelope. Looks like someone's a very popular person here at Sunny Gardens. If only she knew. I forced a smile and took it from her. She bid me good night, and I did the same, ever so desperately waiting for her to leave. When she finally did, I tore it open, and this is what was written inside on a sheet of white paper. Dear Mr. Benson, you don't know me, but I'd like to think that I know you. Call me your secret admirer, although I suppose I'm not so secret anymore. You have given me a lot of joy these past few weeks. When you got that unsightly boner in your bed, I laughed just about as hard as I did when I first watched Blazing Saddles on Turner Classics. My father passed away back in June, and he and I used to watch that channel all the time before I found this one. I'd like to think that your presence with me, day and night, has been something of a comfort in these trying times of mine. You remind me of my father. I noticed that there is a lump on your lower back on your right, my left hand side, a marking that unfortunately reminds me of Dad's appointments of late. It is a shame that Jessica never caught it, especially considering how hard she's been studying. I hope you'll tell her about it. Just don't tell her about the show. I miss the Johnsons, and I'm sure you do too. Sincerely yours, your biggest fan. Tale of Robert Elm. Part 1. The lights of the Seattle skyline suddenly ignite as the city comes alive with the sounds and sights of night. In a rundown bar, a lone man sits beneath the hum of a fluorescent overhead light as he holds his whiskey in shaky hands. The man is an enigma. He appears at the Spade, habitually at 10 p.m. and leaves just before dawn, ordering the same refreshment each time, a tall glass of Irish whiskey. Never speaking words far from the usual or the occasional grunt or whisper, he is a shadow to everyone. To the passerby, this man is just a nobody. He is merely a bum who went down on his luck and turned to the bottle like many before him. To those who know, however, the man's name is Robert Elm, and he has a story to tell. The night was fraught with frigid rain and sleet. The typically lively Spade was deserted except for Robert. He sat in his usual spot. Back left table, facing the wall, hunched over with his beverage in total silence say, for the hum of the light and the drumming of the bartender's fingers on the metal cash register. Over the years that Elm had drifted in as the sun dipped below the horizon, the bartender had grown curious of his motives. Though he told his customers the same old, lost his job, wants to unwind excuse. In his heart, he knew there was something off-kilter about the whiskey-loving shadow. Tonight would be different, The bartender bit his lip, took a deep breath, and approached his loyal customer. The barkeep placed his hand on the table and inquired in the friendliest of tones, "How you doing?" Robert jolted upright as if he had heard a gunshot. He slowly lifted his head and peered deep into the bartender's face with his wide grey eyes. He possessed an unsettling and powerful stare that pierced the air in a way the bartender had never seen before. His mouth slowly slid open as he grumbled, "Fine! And you?" The bartender was stunned. He had expected the old geezer's usual response of a few quiet mumbles, but was greeted by a question that was startlingly normal. I'm just fine," the bartender said. "So, mister, I've been meaning to ask you." Elm's slowly greying eyebrows perked with anticipation. "Why do you come here all the time?" The drunkard chuckled and asked in return, "Why do you care what an old man like me does with his time?" "Because," the bartender said with a look of confusion, "you have come to my bar at the same time of the night every night for the past 12 years, and I am just now hearing you speak. I think that's reason enough for me to ask." The old man burst into laughter that lasted nearly a full minute. Finally, his outburst died off, and he asked, "You wanted to know why I wasn't talking?" "Yes," yelled the bartender. "It's been a riddle I've been trying to figure out for years." Robert sat his drink on the table and said, Well, new friend, honestly, I was waiting for you to ask me that question, and now that we have that elephant out of the room, have a seat across from me." The bartender obliged, took a seat across from his new acquaintance, and, with a look of sheer amazement on his face, he asked, "So, let me get this straight. You never said a word to anyone in this bar for 12 years because you were waiting for someone to come to you?" "Yep," the shade replied, as the bartender gave a short laugh and continued, "Well, sir, what have you been waiting for so long to tell someone?" Robert Elm looked the bartender square in the eye and said, "My story, of course." The bartender gave a quizzical expression as the drinker went on, never breaking his gaze. "The story of why I ended up here, the story of how I narrowly escaped death itself, and since I don't see anyone else here, you, sir, are going to be the first one in a long time to hear my tale. You're in for a treat." The old man cracked a crooked smile. "Well, let's hear it then," the bartender said, and Robert chuckled again. "That's the spirit, kid. Grab a drink and get comfortable. You're in for quite a tale." And so, Robert Elm began his story. It all began back in November 1962. I was living in a small town in rural Iowa. Back then, everybody knew everyone else like family. It was a safe place. That's why my family settled down there, back when the area was a barren patch of farmland. Through the entirety of my teenage years, I was chasing a girl named Elizabeth. I can practically see her now. As time went by, our relationship grew. After high school, we bought her uncle's house on 4th Street and slowly learned to live together as a soon-to-be-married pair. This was a struggle, to say the least. Back when I was a younger man, I had a fiery temper that seemed to grow as we became closer to one another. I remember one specific instance when I heard she had wrecked my dad's Ford. I hit her across the face with a trash can lid. I had never regretted anything more in my life. It wasn't even her fault. Every morning for the next month, I would come downstairs to see the pale red bruise on her face and immediately get too choked up to speak. It was a wonder she kept me around. One night, everything fell apart. I can't even remember why, but she left me on the side of the road and told me to find your own way home, you sack of crap. I remember my heart sinking as she pulled away and I began to wander the side of the empty country road. I'm unsure of how I got so sidetracked, but after about an hour of hysterical rambling, I had ended up halfway into one of the cornfields bordering the only road in and out of town. There I was, sobbing profusely, lashing out at the cornstalks with my fists and wailing, "Elizabeth," and "I'm sorry," at the top of my lungs with only the birds and the occasional scarecrow bearing witness. I hobbled aimlessly for what felt like hours, screaming and crying over what I had put my beloved fiancée through, until I decided to sit down in a barren patch about 15 feet across to catch my breath and form an apology for my eventual homecoming. After inspecting the area for any signs of danger, I laid my head down in the soft dirt to rest my eyes. Several hours of blissful tear-free sleep passed before I was pulled awake by rustling in the stalks. My heart skipped a beat and a chill ran down my spine. I bolted upright. Before me, a massive shape garbed in a shimmering black cloak slid out from the rows of crops. It moved towards me slowly, as if it were floating across the ground, though its feet were clearly visible and it appeared to be human. It had pale, wrinkled hands that hung at its sides as it drifted closer. It drooped its hooded head and spoke squarely into my face in a dry monotone. "Good evening, traveller." Stunned, I got up from the dirt and asked, "Who are you?" He answered, "Just a man on his way to a meeting." I looked at him, bewildered. "Why are you here?" I asked. He looked up and said, "I enjoy taking the scenic routes, so much more peaceful than the hustle and bustle of the roadsides. Now what I'm wondering is who you are, and why are you here?" As I look back, I'm surprised at how eager I was to reveal so much of myself to a total stranger. "My name is Robert," I said sheepishly. "My girlfriend dumped me out here because we got in a fight, and I hit her, and she cried, and... The tears were welling in my eyes again. "Say no more, friend," the man interrupted as he waved his hand. "I offer you a proposition. You may come with me, attend my meeting, my friends and I shall cheer you up, and we will take you back to your home in the morning. How does that sound?" A smile slowly formed on my face as I thanked the hooded figure. I reached out to shake his hand for his patronage, but he quickly recoiled, claiming there was no need to thank him. Together we made our way through the remainder of the field and into the forest that formed an insulated border between patches of farmland. As we walked, I had more time to examine my new friend's figure. He was a titan of a man, to say the least, with hands that could easily cover my own twice over. Blending into the trees themselves, he towered over me at what I assumed to be well over 7 feet. He moved with surprising agility for someone of his size, darting through the branches and over roots at a speed a tad slower than a jog. I had to walk nearly twice as fast to keep up. His robes still shimmered as they did in the cornfield, though the moon was no longer visible. Oddly, no matter how fast the man moved, his hood never failed to conceal his face. Growing bored of silence, I struck up conversation. "So, what's your name?" I asked. The man glanced down and told me, "You may call me Lombard. It is one of my many monikers." "Okay, Lombard, who are these friends of yours, and what is this meeting, and where are we going?" "Just a meeting, friend, held here in the woods with some close acquaintances of mine. You needn't worry about it, Robert. Think of it as more of a party. It will take your mind off of your troubles." It was at this moment I realized what I was doing the exact opposite of what society had taught me. I was found lying in field and decided to walk off with some strange hooded man to go and meet his friends in the woods. Heartbreak can drive people to do some crazy things. It wasn't long before we saw a light in the distance. As we grew nearer, the lights turned out to be a ring of torches lining a circular clearing containing rows of chairs and tables. An altar, draped with red cloth, sat in the middle of it all. At each of the tables sat groups of people dressed similarly to Lombard. Some of them had their faces exposed and hoods down. "We have arrived," said Lombard with glee. "Sit down amongst the others and help yourself to some food and drink. The festivities will begin soon." I made my way to one of the less talkative groups and grabbed a free seat. As I recall, it was the only seat that wasn't taken. Next to me sat an old couple and a younger man with his hood up. When I asked each of them why they were here, I got a less than ideal response. The couple started cackling as if they had just heard the greatest joke of their lives, and the hooded man just grunted something I couldn't make out. Seeing no entertainment in the people around me, I decided to try the food. There were the occasional bits of bread surrounded by meats of all shapes and sizes. Having eaten a filling meal in town a few hours before this all began, I was not exactly starving, so I decided to give the wine a try, which was in goblets sitting in front of each chair. I took a small sip, and my mind took a kick in the pants. My vision became blurred with colour, and I began to choke on my own tongue. The old woman told me that it stops hurting after the third glass and burst into sickening laughter. After about 5 minutes, the effects of the drink finally subsided, and I silently poured the rest onto the ground. I didn't think any of them would notice. Suddenly, a bell rang out, and the diners stood up from their chairs in unison and approached the center of the clearing. Lombard made his way over as he walked me towards the center. "How did you enjoy the refreshments, the guests?" he asked. I held my tongue about my unpleasant experience at the table and said, "Everything was great. I've calmed down quite a bit now. What's next?" "Excellent, my friend. I'm sure you will patch things up with that girl after tonight, and I'm glad to have been of assistance to you. But now we have business to attend to." We found ourselves standing in the center of a circle of the hooded guests, all of them with hoods up and hands folded in front of them. Lombard instructed me to sit in the center of the ring. When I objected, he told me this was just a formality in order for the group to accept my presence amongst them for the night. I knelt as I was told, and Lombard took his place at the crimson altar. As I glanced around me, all of the robed people seemed to be emanating a strange droning sound that rose and fell as the minutes passed. I looked up at my mountainous guide, who had turned to face the center of the circle, and to my amazement had drawn back his hood to reveal a sight I would never forget. On Lombard's long, broad shoulders sat the head of a goat, jet black save for a stripe of white between its pale green eyes and spiraling ivory-colored horns that curled backward behind his ears. The thing that stood in front of me lifted his hands into the air and the droning immediately ceased. Lombard's head reeled backward as he shouted into the night, "Ladies and gentlemen of the Black Circle, I present to you the Pale!" The crowd roared with cheers and jubilation. "On this night we shall end the torment and bring about a new era of peace for our order." The younger man I sat next to earlier approached the orator. "My lordship," he whispered as he bowed on one knee, "I witnessed him earlier. He has not accepted the purifier. We cannot continue until he has." He then retreated back to his place and resumed the stance. "Is that so?" said Lombard quizzically. "Well then, I am sorry to delay, my children, but the sacrament must wait." The circle answered the statement with boos and howls of disapproval. A large member drew a curved blade from his robes and approached me. I attempted to stand, but was pulled down to my knees by an unseen force. "For the love of Sekra! I've waited my whole life for this moment," the man shouted as he flipped the knife in his hand. "Stop, you fool! You will undo everything!" Lombard roared as he latched on to the man's arms. The last memory I have of that night was of the gargantuan, tree-like form of Lombard grappling with the hooded man until they both crashed to the ground in front of me. In the tangle of limbs, the handle of the man's knife struck me squarely between the eyes and I lost consciousness. Part 2. I awoke in a small, sparsely furnished room with white walls and dark brown hardwood floor. Based on what I saw around me, I was able to estimate that the building was built in the late 19th century. I attempted to pull my head from the pillow, but was met with a crippling pain in my forehead, where the knife handle had struck me at the ceremony in the woods. My legs were sore and felt as though they were filled with cement. It made me shiver that I could not figure out what prevented me from standing at the ceremony. Muffled speech resonated from outside my room as the door opened. A goat-headed Lombard strolled into the room and closed the door behind him. "Good morning, my guest," he bellowed. "I assume you enjoyed your nap." "Yeah, I did," I answered. "Right after that friend of yours almost broke my nose." "You needn't worry about him, my friend. His foolish actions have cost him his place in the order," he said with a reassuring tone. Lombard sat down on the bed next to me, and I instinctively wrenched my legs backward. "Calm thyself, friend. I am indeed human, and this is just a mask, nothing more." "What about everything else? The mumbo-jumbo you guys were talking about, the goat head, the black circle. I want answers. Now." "Ah, you have a right to be frightened. All will be explained to you. Let me start from the beginning." He readjusted himself on the bed to face me. "In the late 1800s, two cousins founded a town not far from here. It was a small farming community, very prosperous, a thriving community until the fever hit. Many died, including the mayor's daughter. In a last-ditch effort, the community banded together and stood united against the disease. They burned the village to the ground and moved into the mayor's farmhouse, the house you are sitting in right now. The plan was a success. With all the medical personnel gathered in one area, it was much easier to treat the sick, and soon the fever was eradicated. Out of habit, the community stayed in this house as a single family to this day, of which I am the patriarch. The goat headdress symbolizes the single species of beast that provided us with food and drink during the dark times, and for your information, it's permanently adhered to my head. We dubbed ourselves the Black Circle, in name of the black table in the dining hall we would gather around to tell stories of hope to inspire one another. The event you were the center of was known as a neophyte's sacrament. We give the newcomer a small dose of a hallucinogenic and provoke you to reveal your true feelings to us in order to tell if we can trust you. I was strongly opposed to the sacrament, but I was pressured by the others and had no choice. The words we used were simply to disguise our discussion due to the circle's lack of trust. As for the actions of Alabaster, I sincerely apologize. Lombard pulled up his massive form and spoke directly to me. Here I am, Valentine Ambrose Lombard II, with nothing to hide, at your service. Needless to say, I was awestruck at the volume of information that was imparted onto me. Before I could respond, Lombard asked, "Any questions?" I shook my head, just as a woman wearing simple brown robes came into the room, dropped to one knee and said flatly, "You are needed in the infirmary, my lord." Lombard turned to her and stated, "I will be there as soon as I can, Alice." "Did Stefan have a run-in with the thresher again?" "No," she laughed with a smile, eyes still trained on the floor. "Pierre was picking on Sylvia again. She snapped and let him have it with her little fists. I have them both down there waiting for you." The leader gave a hearty laugh. "That Pierre, almost as mischievous as I was when I was a little boy." He turned to me. "I will be back to speak with you later, friend, but now I must deal with this matter first. Get some rest." Both the leader and the woman walked out of the room and shut the door on their way out, leaving only silence in their wake. My head felt heavy, and I decided to take my new friend's advice and rest my eyes. I awoke in what looked like early morning to see Lombard sitting at the desk at the edge of my room. "Morning, friend," he said joyfully. "Come, sit, have something to eat." He stood up from the chair to reveal a platter of sausage and bread with a glass of juice next to it. I was able to pull myself up from the bed. My legs were sore and my knees locked up, but I hobbled my way to the desk and sat down. I began to sample the meal. "Gather your strength. You will need it for later. I have gotten it approved with the circle. I shall give you a tour of the house and the grounds around 3 today, so try and get those legs working by then." Lombard gave a quick wave of his hand as he left the room like wind blowing through the woods. I had finished my odd-tasting dish after a few minutes. I sat for the remainder of the time stretching out my tired legs while looking out of the window. The full day of bed rest and the struggle against whatever held me to the ground had left them aching and weakened. An expanse of farmland spread out in front of me, ending at a dense forest, the single dirt road lined with torches leading up to the house. I assumed that somewhere in the woods there was the picnic table and the altar, and beyond that the cornfield where I had met my guide, and somewhere beyond that was Elizabeth. "Home," I sighed. "Ready?" I jumped with surprise as Lombard broke the silence in the room. Time had passed faster than I had expected. "Come, follow me, friend." I made uneasy strides out into a foyer with a painting of another goat-headed man, a massive chandelier lighting the room below and the rows of rooms lining the walls. "Here is the second floor, used for boarding for our members. The room you are staying in is the guest room. It is not used very often. It overlooks the entrance room, which we will visit later." "Is that you in the painting?" I asked. "Ha! No, that is the founder of the circle, my great-grandfather, Ambrose Garrett Lombard. What a great man. I wish I could have known him in person." "So he started the whole goat head thing?" I laughed rhetorically. We made our way downstairs, wandering through the entrance room and the living room and the sitting room, listening to Lombard's tales of him, reading stories to the children by the fireside in the winter, and of the old man who was a master of the old grand piano sitting in the living room. I asked him about the double doors at the end of the entrance room, only to receive a response that I should not go in there as I do not have high enough clearance to enter yet. We walked outside and we explored the grounds. From the outside, the house was massive. It was clearly some kind of old farmhouse. We made a left turn around the house to find 3 buildings off in the distance. I asked Lombard what they were for. He said one of them was the chapel, now dilapidated and unused, a small building used for a school, and a smaller concrete building used for storage. I shrugged plainly and we moved on. I took that moment to ask, "Well, sir, what exactly is your job here?" Lombard stopped mid-walk to contemplate my question. "I am the headmaster of the order, friend. I am many things. Judge, principal, father, doctor, lots of things, friend." We walked back up to my room, and Lombard instructed me that now that I know where I am, I can move about the property at will, but only during the day. At night, I was confined to my room. Seeing as the sun was descending below the horizon, I went off to bed. I spent the next few days wandering the grounds while getting my bearings with the area and get a sense of location. After speaking with some of the other followers of Lombard, I noticed a constant theme. They never broke eye contact, and they spoke in a very calm manner. Regardless of age, they would find a clever way to avoid any of my questions, specifically ones involving Lombard, the concrete building, or what happens in the Grand Hall. Seeing that I would never find anything out from the members, I decided to go answer hunting myself. Making my way out to the structure, which was about a football field's length from the house, I decided to carefully inspect it. The building had no windows and a single iron door secured with a large padlock. I was going to investigate it further, but before I could find a way to open the lock, the sun began to set, and I reluctantly returned to the house. A couple of weeks of fruitless investigation passed until I was finally returned to my full, healthy state. Feeling my strength returning, I began my morning with a quick workout. Lombard entered mid-push-up. "So, I see you are back on your feet again," he said dryly. "Yep, feeling pretty good," I returned. Lombard paced back and forth. "I imagine you will want to go home soon." He sighed. I stood up and looked at the tree-like figure. "Yeah, I suppose. I miss Elizabeth quite a bit, and I want to make amends." Good. Lombard paused. "Robert, if you could stay just one more week. We feel like you have become a member of the family around here, and we wish to perform a departure ritual this Sunday. Just to say goodbye. You have been one of the kindest outsiders we have encountered in a long time." I walked up to the goat-headed giant, looked him in the eye like he had done to me so many times before, and smiled. "I would be honored, friend." That night, just before sundown, Lombard drifted once more into my room. He spoke in a much more serious tone than before, and his posture created an imposing aura about him. "Robert, we are having a ritual in preparation for your departure. I require that you, doctor, not disrupt it. Please stay in this room until my return. It is just a kind of rehearsal. I don't want to ruin any surprises." I quickly nodded in agreement, trying to ignore the sudden change in the headmaster's attitude as he sped out of the room. I had not been truly honest with my host during my stay in the house. For every act of hospitality he offered, there was an event or element that would cause a pang of distrust in my mind. One moment, Lombard would provide me with food, and I would see him teaching the children like a loving relative, but the next I would notice the concrete shack or remember what had happened in the woods weeks ago. The loving kindness of the members juxtaposed with their unnervingly smooth speech and piercing stares. Every impulse in my mind told me to run, but I knew I would never make it far before I was captured. Or worse. This mysterious decree had brought my curiosity to its breaking point, and that night I made my decision. As soon as the house fell silent, I removed my heavy work boots, slid the door open, and stepped into the dark abyss. I had been climbing trees in my neighborhood park since childhood, and the challenge of scaling the banquet hall's walls came easily to me. After making my way down the stairs, through the foyer, and out of the door without so much as a sound, I was impressed with my sneaking abilities. I ran around to the side of the hall and began my ascension. The climb was easy enough. Several chunks were missing from the old bricks, creating excellent handholds. It wasn't long before I found myself on the roof. From the inside, I could hear the same droning sound that I had heard my night in the woods. I desperately searched for a way inside when I came upon a small hatch that led to a ladder that dropped off in a kind of storage attic. Hunkering in next to some old boxes, I was able to hear and see the events unfolding below me with startling clarity. A crooked grin grew across my face as I anticipated the truth. The droning of the hooded worshippers hushed, and the mammoth Lombard took the stage next to an eerily familiar altar. He raised his hands like the night we first met as he spoke with gusto. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Black Circle, I gather you once again to bring praise to Sekra and to celebrate the presence of the Pale, whose life shall meet its beautiful end on the eve of this coming Sunday." The crowd roared with approval. "My friends, I sincerely apologize for the—" Lombard growled under his breath. "Interruption. A few weeks ago." The audience erupted into a shower of boos and shouting. Now, my children, I have planned a rehearsal of sorts to show you all how we shall deal with the wretched Pale and drive this scourge from our beautiful order. I present to you the man who is to blame for the delay, Brother Alabaster." Each member howled with joy as they pulled a blindfolded man, naked save for a loincloth, with numerous strange tattoos adorning his chiseled torso, into the room and onto the altar. I felt my dinner rise in my throat. 3 men in red cloaks fastened the man's arms and legs to the altar as Lombard reached into a chest behind him. Alabaster was sobbing with fear, and his pleads for help became incoherent screams as his limbs were restrained until one of the men in red wrapped a piece of cloth over his mouth to silence him. Lombard spun around at lightning speed and raised a shimmering dagger above his head. "Here and now, we give an offering to you, almighty Sekra, an offering of flesh and blood." Alabaster was writhing now, the altar glistening with sweat and blood welling at the corners of his mouth as he struggled to cry out. The crowd lurched forward with anticipation, licking their lips with bloodlust in their eyes. "Now, for the glory of the Mother, he gives his life." Lombard pulled away the cloth, and Alabaster let out a scream so loud I could have heard it from my room. "Help me!" The gag was pulled back, and he was struck across the face. They pulled the cloth back again, and he cried, "For the glory of the Mother I give my life." Without hesitation, Lombard drove the blade into the man's abdomen as he resumed screaming with pain and fear. The headmaster made a long cut up the stomach. I could hear bones cracking and flesh ripping as the man moaned in agony. Liquid scarlet spattered the headmaster's hands as it spouted from the gaping wound. Lombard tossed the bloodied knife aside. He then plunged his hands into Alabaster's twitching body and wrenched his arms upward several times until what appeared to be a liver was ripped away. I nearly vomited. Lombard held the dripping organ above his head and shouted, "For the glory of Sekra!" He plunged the hunk of flesh into his mouth like a wild beast. The crowd cheered with jubilation at the unholy sight. The corpse was unbound and dragged off into a side room. I was frozen, unblinking, as my past feelings for my seemingly kind friend shattered. Before I could process what was going on, I heard Lombard address the members. "No one is to speak of this to our guest, and regarding the Pale, I'm going to see how our friend is doing," he said with a chuckle as the cloaked men and women overflowed with laughter. I was back on the roof before Lombard could leave the stage. Part 3. With my heart thundering, I bolted back to the roof as fast as lightning and hurled myself from the roof. Using my prior climbing skills, I tucked my legs in and rolled across the grass. I only sustained few minor bruises. I ran around the side of the house, up the stairs, and back into my room just as I heard the great hall open. I heard Lombard's thundering footsteps as he climbed the stair and approached the door. The door opened and the giant's eyes met mine. "Good to see your evening was a relaxing one, friend." I shrugged and said, "I've had better. I had a strange nightmare, really messed with my head. How did your ritual go?" playing dumb with him as best I could. Lombard nodded. All was well. The congregation is eagerly awaiting this Sunday's celebration. Enjoy your rest, friend. I could still see little bits of hastily wiped away viscera clinging to his mask. Lombard shut the door as I heard the rest of the worshippers coming into the entrance hall. I sat and pondered my situation. I was trapped in this god-forsaken place for one more week until they had decided to kill me. I had 1 week to discover what was really going on here and 7 short days to plan my escape. The next morning, I woke up early and ran off to the library, thinking that would be a good place to learn some information. The place had a wealth of books, everything from War and Peace to Pat the Bunny. I wandered the endless shelves until I reached the back corner of the room. All that sat on the last dusty shelf was an old book with a leather cover. Nothing about it caught my eye, save for the title, The Book of Sekra. Remembering the mysterious name from the horror of last night, I snatched up the scripture and scurried out of the library unnoticed. I sat at the desk in my room and flung open the ancient volume. Before me sprawled mounds of text in Old English. Though it was in English, it was still difficult to understand as I trudged through chapters of sacrifice and law. I found not much beyond useless gibberish about ceremonies, a few of which I recognized. The method in which one is to fasten a goat's head to their own and a full-page print of a slender woman sitting on a throne with what looked like blood spattered around her mouth. Below, it read, Sekra, Her Holiness. I returned the book to the library and decided to scour the grounds. Seeing as there was no way I could budge the padlock on the concrete shack, I instead made my way to the chapel. The door slid open easily enough, and inside was what appeared to be a graveyard of old boxes and furniture. After searching for a few hours, I found nothing of interest amongst the stacks of rotting wood. The schoolhouse next door yielded similar results. A few desks sat in simple rows with a teacher's desk with a plaque bearing the name Master Lombard and a chalkboard at the front of the room. Nothing else. Feeling defeated, I emerged from the building when something caught my eye. In the grass at the door of the concrete building sat a shining padlock. My heart leapt into my throat, and I sprinted toward the shack. I reached for the iron handle of the door when it suddenly sprang open. A short, stubby man emerged quickly, shutting the door. He noticed me, and pushed his back against the door and spoke. "Oh, no, boy. Don't go in there. This place is not for the outsiders. Turn back around, boy. Go back to your room, lest I call for the headmaster." I sighed and grudgingly returned to the house. Though I was distraught over this defeat, I returned to my bed and met sleep with open arms. During the following days, I felt my sanity slipping away as I slowly came to grips with my fate. I stayed in bed most of the days, refusing to eat and trying to relive as many happy memories as I could before Sunday's inevitable bloodletting. Several times during my stay, I had seen people running for the woods, but they were almost immediately apprehended by groups of men clad in red cloaks. I feared the same would happen to me, and decided against making a run for it. Eventually pulling myself up on Saturday night, I thought about my situation once more. Clasping my hands together, I contemplated how I could possibly survive. By the time I shut my eyes, I had summoned my last shreds of bravery and constructed a plan with a mental image of the house so I would know my best route out of this place. Shutting my plans away in my head and taking a deep breath, I surrendered to my subconscious. I rose late on Sunday afternoon, unfitting for one's final day on earth, but the inevitability of death weighed on me and kept me in bed. Lombard entered the room around 6 o'clock. "Are you ready to leave us, friend? We are making preparations for the ceremony now. When you are ready, please approach the painting at the other side of the second floor. Slide the painting to the right and it should reveal a staircase. The staircase leads to my chambers. I need to perform the finishing touches for the farewell." I quietly nodded as the door closed. For a few moments I sat and considered my plans. Sitting, sweating, and breathing heavily, I made my decision. I snatched one of the pencils from the desk drawer and slid it into my right boot. Following the giant's orders, I climbed the hidden staircase and entered a large circular room. The walls were lined with bookcases, with a massive desk resting in the center. On the desk sat piles of papers and a typewriter. Moonlight flooded in from a window above it all. Lombard greeted me with a hearty laugh. He told me to remove all of my clothing except for my pants. I obliged and slowly inched toward him as I began unlacing my work boots. My left sock and boot sat on the floor next to me, and I began to work on my right. Glancing behind me, I saw Lombard looming in anticipation. I smirked and slowly slid the pencil from my boot. Without hesitation, I drove the pencil with all of my might into the Titan's stomach. Lombard buckled from the strike and dropped to his knees. I heard blood gurgling in his throat. I snatched the typewriter from the desk, slid it across the desk as hard as I could, and smashed it across Lombard's face. The headmaster collapsed to the ground in a puddle of his own blood. Turning, I was about to make my way out of the room when I heard quiet laughter emanating from behind me. I spun around to see a bloodied Lombard rising from the carpet. His mask was now distorted and blood-soaked. "You, friend, are smarter than the average fool we drag off to this place," he croaked. I gritted my teeth. "I'm leaving this place. I know what happened a week ago. Now tell me what really goes on here." Lombard chuckled. "As you wish. What I told you about our history that morning was, in fact, true, though there were a few things I left out to keep you under my thumb. Those two cousins who founded the town are closer to us than you think. One of them was my great-grandfather, and the other was yours. Medicine was no longer working to drive away the blight, and my ancestor, great visionary that he was, decided to turn to other means of treatment. He found an old book amongst what he had found sightseeing in the old country. You seem to be familiar with it, which outlined how to give praise to an ancient goddess, Sekra. In exchange for a human life, Sekra would save another. We soon began using her divine will to save the community. However, your great-grandfather, blinded to reality by his morals, left the village. Just before the birth of his child, he made a vow to Dialis, the brother and polar opposite of the glorious Sekra, god of morality and justice, that his bloodline would be forever devoted to the eradication of our order. This whole ordeal has been our effort to destroy the one human that can destroy us and end the bloodline once and for all. I shook my head at all his story and asked, So, all of this was planned? How much of this is a plan? How long have you people been trying to do me in? I shall get to that in a moment, but here is a secret you will truly enjoy. Normally, one of your blood could cause a member of our order with an aura as dark as mine to drop dead at a single touch. I took this into account when dealing with you. I have been nullifying your power with the one thing that will weaken it, human flesh and blood. I went white at Lombard's statement. He began to laugh even harder. That's right, friend. I have personally slipped a bit of human into each of your meals since you got here. You never even knew. Oh, your ancestors would be proud of you. Little did he know I hadn't eaten in days. I flung my hand out and grasped Lombard's wrist. Wrenching down, I felt a texture similar to squeezing down on raw meat. The giant roared as droplets of liquefied flesh dripped onto the floor. I apparently still had some power. He roared with pain and anger. I continued to twist and yank with my vice-like grip. I felt the crunching and oozing of now gelatinous bone pulling away from the muscle. Suddenly, I jerked with all of my might and gripped onto Lombard's severed hand as the rest of him fell to the ground in a writhing heap. Lombard clutched his bloody stub. I see you wizened up to my trickery, clever man that you are. No matter. You will not leave this place alive. I will see to that. I shouted to him, You will never kill me, you monster. As soon as I escape, I'm taking Elizabeth and getting as far from town as we can. You will never be able to find us. Lombard began his hoarse laughter again. You will never be safe, friend. Even when you think you are the most protected, we will be there, watching you. We will never forget. Not even with that girl of yours are you safe. Wait till you hear that tale. Surely you noticed how your emotions distorted when you were close to here. You should know we took the liberty of turning her into a tool of sorts. We altered her mind to force you into awakening the ancient blood in your veins in order to drive you apart and into the arms of the circle. She was one of the most instrumental tools in our plot. She was such a naive girl. What a fool. Pretty too. I lost it. I flung myself at my captor once again, and pressing my boot into his chest, I wrapped my hands around his horns and began to pull. Lombard screamed with pain as I pulled at the mask. I felt each stitch pop as I wrenched upward. The Titan began to flail his hand and stab at my body, but every contact with my skin resulted in a feeling akin to the man punching a slab of molten metal. With one last ferocious pull, I felt the final stitch tear, and I flung the headdress against the wall in a splatter of blood and teeth. Lombard's body flailed, and I ran to the door. His disfigured face writhed as he cried into the air, "I swear it, Robert Elm. You will never escape the hand of the Black Circle. You will die by my hand." I smirked at my handiwork. "We will see, friend." I promptly sprinted down the staircase and out of the silent house. My legs ached from the fight with the giant, but I shrugged off the pain and ran across the grass as fast as I could. As I passed by the great hall, I could hear shrieks of terror and sorrow. I chuckled at the reaction I had caused. "I'll never see that thing again," I muttered. I hurried myself to the concrete shack at the edge of the property. I figured now was a good enough time as any to see if I can get in that mysterious building. Halfway through the field, I turned to see hooded men with torches beginning their search for me. I quickened my pace. I was able to reach the unlocked door while the search party went off to investigate the barn and tool shed. Taking advantage of my moment of safety, I slowly slid the door open and saw a rather anticlimactic sight. The room was dimly lit by a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Several barrels stood around the corners and walls. A workbench was fastened to the wall next to another large metal door at the end of the room. Just as I got to investigating the room, I heard footsteps from behind the second door. My heart skipped a beat, and I had no choice but to conceal myself in one of the barrels. I slid back the lid and was met with a horrendous stench that caused me to gag uncontrollably. Reluctantly, I climbed into what felt like runny swamp sludge and held my breath. As soon as I did, the old man I saw earlier pushed the door open and hobbled into the room holding what looked like a corpse slung over his shoulder. He approached the workbench and flung the body onto the table. To my horror, he began, meticulously, working at the body with an assortment of knives, cutting and slicing with surgical precision. The entrance to the room opened again, and a group of hooded searchers entered and asked the old man if they had seen a man matching my description anywhere. He insisted that he had not, and, after scanning the room for a few seconds, the men left as quickly as they came. I waited stiffly in the barrel, holding my breath as best I could, taking in brief sips of air and staying as quiet as possible as not to reveal my location. Suddenly, I heard the old man mutter to himself, "Oh yes, you will cook up nicely, won't you?" He let out a quiet chuckle. I gagged again, half with sickness and half with shock. I had caught the man's attention. Deciding it was time for me to make a move, I silently lifted the lid of the barrel and slid my soaked form onto the dark floor. Fear gripping tight, lid in hand, I raced toward the stunned butcher and struck him on the head with the hunk of wood. He dropped to the floor with a dull thud. I snatched the blade from his hand and made a dash for the door, but not before looking at myself under the dim light. My stomach turned as I saw an entire body soaked in a heavy coating of blood and chunks of meat. It drizzled and pooled on the floor. It sickened me. Holding back the urge to vomit, I nudged the door open, revealing a dark tunnel, far more organic than anything I had seen in quite a while. All was silent, except for the drips of blood from my skin and clothes. I quickened my pace as I heard shouting from far behind me. I held my breath, ignored the looming claustrophobia, and soldiered on through the darkness. The near-endless tunnel finally opened into a small candlelit room. It was only about 12 feet across, with an arching ceiling. I had little time to examine my surroundings, for when I entered the room, I saw a hooded worshipper with his back facing me, holding what appeared to be an old hunting rifle. Though at first, my heart raced as I anticipated my own death, I was stunned to realize that he was unaware of my presence. Seizing the moment, I lashed out at the crown of his head with my stolen weapon. The man let out a quick yelp, fell to the ground, and lay motionless as blood pooled around his hood. I let the knife rest in his skull and snatched up the firearm. "Here's something I can use," I mumbled to myself as I slung it over my shoulder. On the floor, I noticed a small metal hatch. Seeing nowhere else to go and remembering the search party on my tail, I opened it, descending the ladder it revealed. The ladder met the ground in an alcove on the shore of a small pond. Near the ladder, I found plastic tubs filled with things like shoes, backpacks, dog collars, among other things. Remembering the room with the old man and the cult's cannibalistic tendencies, the sight of all these tattered belongings was bittersweet. Grabbing one of the largest packs, I saw a pile of metallic objects out of the corner of my eye. Bikes! Taking a deep sigh, I picked up the newest looking one and rode off through the woods as fast as the wheels would spin into the night. After trudging onward through the woods for most of the night and subsisting off of some trail mix I found in the bag I took, I finally arrived in town. Needless to say, my friends and neighbours were amazed by my return. However, I knew I could not stay and chat. Walking up to my house, Elizabeth rushed out to meet me. I didn't even look at her. I continued inside, gathered my belongings and climbed into my car, with Elizabeth chasing me the whole way, asking me what was wrong and where I had been. I ignored her. She looked at me with a face of sorrow that I knew was just a mask, and when our eyes met, I could tell she knew the answers to her questions. I backed out of the drive and made my way to the highway. I never saw that town or Elizabeth again. Many years passed. I travelled town to town, but every time they found me, they always found me. For years I have been running from them, but I doubt I will ever escape their grasp. I have found safe haven in this place for 12 years, but I fear that they are now drawing near once again. I'm too old to run any more, my friend. Just too old now. The bartender stared in astonishment. So, that is why you have been so solitary? Yes, I have fooled myself into thinking that the more I kept to myself, the safer I would be. The bartender stuttered. And you're drinking? The sacrifice? The liver thing? Is that why? The storyteller let out a hearty laugh. Ha! Yes! When they do find me and bite into my flesh, I want them to choke on it. The barkeep laughed grimly, and the old man noticed that the moon was low. He stood and dusted off his pants. I'd best be leaving now. The sun will be here soon. It was a relief to finally share this story with someone. The bartender smiled. It was a joy hearing it. Have a good rest of the night. Mr. Elm Robert nodded and started for the door. He took the subway home like he had every night coming home from the bar, shaking his hands to keep the cold away. After a short ride, he made his way into his apartment building and climbed the stairs. He took a brief sigh and slowly opened his door. After hanging up his coat and scarf on the coat hanger and taking a seat in an armchair near the door, he looked off into the darkness and something caught his eye. It was a gargantuan figure with pale green eyes watching him from the shadow of the apartment. Slowly, the shape plodded forward to reveal a grotesque face and a wicked, mangled grin. Robert Elm sat motionless as he looked up at the being. The thing spoke to him in a laboured, devilish groan. Good evening, buried in hanging hills. When Jade was only 12 years old, her father came home one afternoon with his arms and legs covered in claw marks. Jade felt confused and excited about his appearance. While she didn't like seeing her dad hurt, she wondered if he finally bought her the cat or dog she wanted. He wasn't good with animals, and she figured it must have attacked him on the car ride home. To Jade's dismay, he didn't bear hug her or call her his little troll, a nickname he gave her for the vibrantly coloured hair extensions she always wore. He hurried into the bathroom and shut the door. Second time. This isn't good at all, she heard him say through the door. I have to. The rest of his words were muffled and eventually drowned out by the sound of blasting water from the shower. He had been acting strange for the past few weeks. This instance proved no exception. She wasn't particularly bothered by the late nights he spent at the office or the number of business trips he took to some faraway state. When he asked her to stop calling her dad one day and to call him Frank, she knew something was seriously wrong. She loved calling Frank Dad, but Frank Butler insisted she was old enough. For a long time, Jade thought this had something to do with the divorce, but now she wasn't sure at all. When a few minutes lapsed into a half hour, Jade decided to call her friend Sasha about going to Hubbard Park, which was right down the street from Frank's house. Jade wasn't supposed to use the house phone without permission, but she counted on him being in the bathroom for a while and had a few hours until her mum would stop by. She cautiously dialed Sasha's number, listening for any changes in sound from the bathroom. "Hey, Sash. What's up, JD Bean? Oh God, that commercial is so old. Want to go to Hubbard? I guess. I thought you were with, what's he want you to call him again?" "Frank. He's so weird." "Ugh, so weird," Sasha repeated, laughing. "Yeah, I'll go. I got to go to drama club at 4 though. See you soon." "Kay, see ya." Jade left a note on the kitchen counter about her whereabouts and headed into the garage to grab her bike. As she stepped onto the concrete floor, she was surprised to find the interior vacant except for her blue Trek bike and a lone tool shelf. Before the divorce, the garage was full of sports equipment, gardening tools, and an extra fridge stocked with sports-themed beverages for when Frank coached her soccer team. Now, not only was the garage devoid of those remnants of her old life, but it was impeccably clean. Jade thought it was suspiciously clean. She figured he was in one of his moods again when she heard him shout, "This is disgusting!" Whether it was due to work or another argument with her mum, she didn't want to know. She knew he couldn't keep his promise about a new cat or dog. Frank was full of broken promises, anger, and nothing more. She didn't even care how he got the claw marks anymore. All Jade knew as she rode off toward the park was that she barely recognized her dad or the house she once called home. Thankfully, Sasha breathed life into her otherwise disappointing day. She smiled as she pulled into the park and saw Sasha on her purple mountain bike. As she fixed her braids, Jade thought about how lucky Sasha was to have actual blue streaks. Clip extensions were the only hair alterations Frank approved of. He used to never care about hair or clothes, but now always had something to say when she stopped by. Jade's mom said he worried about her becoming a proper young lady. She didn't believe this at all. "Jady Bean, you look like hell." "Gee, thanks, Sash." "Chillax." "I'm just saying. Wait, did your dad?" "I don't want to talk about it. Want to go to Castle Craig?" Sasha enthusiastically nodded as they rode to the trail, which was located on top of a hill in a gravel parking lot. The girls would often go to Castle Craig when the weather was nice or when they needed to clear their minds. They loved the hike because it crossed a pedestrian bridge over the busy freeway, which was fun to look down on, and the views from the stone castle as well as the Traprock mountain ridge were magnificent. From those heights, the girls could see all of Meriden, which the girls loved but made them a little sad as they would both be moving in a matter of months. Jade was beginning to wonder, however, if she'd be better off living further away from the man she used to call Dad. "Did you hear about the 2 girls that disappeared last month?" Sasha asked as they locked their bikes to the trailhead fence. "They were from Kensington, I think. They went to Hubbard and never came home." Jade scrunched her nose, grabbing a long stick to hike with. "I thought it was just a rumor." "Are you kidding? It was all over the news last month." "I don't really watch the news." "Doesn't it worry you?" "Why would it?" "Your mom is talking about moving there, and so are my parents. It's pretty crazy. I heard girls from Kensington disappear all the time." "Sure, Sash," Jade said, still failing to see her friend's point. For now, they lived in Meriden. It would make more sense to be worried now. This logic evaded Sasha, however, as she was more inclined to rumors than logic. As they passed a few hikers and headed onto the pedestrian bridge, Jade couldn't help but feel annoyed by Sasha's stories of missing Kensington girls. Jade felt a bit scared about crossing the bridge, even though it was completely enclosed by metal fencing. "I'm serious, Jady Bean. My older cousin told me that sometime in the 90s, 3 girls in her class went up there after graduation and never came back." "Your cousin Aaliyah, who does tarot and is psychic?" "What's wrong with tarot?" "Nothing. Forget it. Hey, there's a dog at the end of the bridge. What's it doing there?" "Am I crazy? Or is it, like, glowing?" At the end of the pedestrian bridge stood a small, vaguely spaniel-like, short-haired black dog. They couldn't really see its face as it was sniffing something on the ground. For some reason, as it panted, the dog looked quite blurry. Jade rubbed her eyes, thinking it was her contacts, but the blurriness remained. Something wasn't right about the dog. As they walked over the bridge in caution, it still seemed blurry and wouldn't look at them. The dog wasn't fazed by the girl's loud footsteps or the booming traffic below. Jade could almost see the glow Sasha mentioned, a small layer of fog circulating its body. Are you seeing what I'm... Don't move! Jade stuck her arm out as the dog finally looked up. Its eyes were deep brown and strangely sad. The dog opened its mouth to bark. No sound came out. I don't like this. Let's get out of here. Jesus Christ, Sash! Despite Jade's inhibitions, Sasha continued over the bridge. Jade suddenly felt dizzy, unsure if she should be looking at the road below or the strange dog that made no sound when it barked. Don't touch it! It might be lost, Sasha said several paces ahead. Reluctantly, Jade sprinted to the edge of the bridge. As they both stopped before the strange black dog, the layer of fog disappeared. It still seemed kind of blurry though, and its eyes looked even sadder than before. Even though it was still panting as Sasha stroked its back, maybe Jade needed new contacts. This seems weird, but does it seem kind of blurry to you? Sasha paused and thought for a moment. Yeah, and cold. Feel this. Sasha forced Jade's hand onto the dog's back. It seemed really cold, as if it had just stepped out of a walk-in freezer. She couldn't make sense of the blurriness either. The dog was sitting right in front of them. She remembered the Photoshop program she used in computer class and how her teacher taught her how to blur objects. None of this made sense. Images could blur, not real-life animals. Whether it was the dog's sad brown eyes, its thin black fur, or its short wagging tail, it didn't seem like a complete animal. This makes no sense. Jade took her hand off the dog, looking up at Sasha's still excited expression. Let's get out of here, or continue up to the top. Maybe its owner is nearby, I don't know. We can't leave it. I guess you're right. Jade and Sasha took a few steps off of the bridge and onto the trail. Even though Sasha happily petted the dog, Jade didn't want to be anywhere near it. The more she looked away, however, the dizzier she felt. When Sasha glanced up from the dog, she said something Jade couldn't hear. Her words were muffled, almost distorted. She felt increasingly lightheaded and weak, falling backward down a leaf-covered dirt hill. As Jade rolled over a few jagged rocks, she began to panic. She felt too weak to move her body and break the fall. She braced herself as she rolled just feet away from oncoming traffic. Before she reached the pavement, two rugged hands grabbed her and everything faded to black. Jade opened her eyes to meet two arid blue ones. She recognized the thick blonde beard and plaid shirt that smelt like menthols. It was Frank, and next to him Sasha, with a face drenched in tears. What was he doing here? It took only a few moments for Jade to realize she was back on the pedestrian bridge, laying on Frank's nylon backpack, her entire body draped in aching sores. Are you okay, sweetheart? Yeah. What are you doing here? Oh my God, Jadey Bean! Sasha threw her arms around her and squeezed tightly. Jade groaned, and Sasha profusely apologized. I'm so sorry. It's just, that was so scary. Are you sure you're okay? Yeah. Dad, Frank, what are you doing here? He laughed, which she found quite odd given the circumstances. Despite taking a shower, his long beard and scruffy hair seemed dirty. There were also more marks on his face. It's quite a coincidence, actually. I was heading to the hardware store and pulled to the side of the road because I blew a tire. I heard a loud noise coming down the hill, and there was my little troll. Frank hugged her tightly. Jade embraced him as he sounded like he was ready to sob. Honey, you have to be careful when you hike. You know this. We tried, Jade said weakly. But we saw this little black dog, and I felt really dizzy, and I'm sorry, Dad. Yeah, it was really cute but weird looking, Sasha chimed in. Frank's expression grew stern as he raised his hand to stop them. Did it see you? They nodded simultaneously. Frank exhaled deeply, wiping the dirt from his face. This is going to sound crazy, girls, but you just have to, trust me. That was no normal dog. Some say a little black dog haunts these hills. What? Like a ghost? Sasha blurted out. Something like that. Dar, Frank. I thought you didn't believe in those things. I usually don't, but this one's different. Years ago, when your great-grandfather was a little kid, there were two geologists who fell to their deaths after seeing it. It's documented and everything. Grandpa Lou swore about it till his death, and he never spoke of anything spooky but that. He said, "You see it once for luck, twice for sorrow, and 3 times for death. I've even—" "None of this makes sense," Jade moaned. "I thought you didn't believe in that stuff either." And she didn't have much luck. "Have you seen a dog like that before?" Jade studied Frank's expression for a moment to be sure that he was serious. They barely had any deep conversation since the divorce, but all of a sudden, he was launching into this weird folktale. Oddly enough, what he said made sense. A memory deep within Jade unlocked, one from years ago when she was lost in Hubbard Park. She was no more than 4 years old. She felt scared until she saw a small black dog standing by a tree. It stayed there until her parents found her. Why had she forgotten? Then again, she had forgotten a lot over the years. "Yeah, I think so," Jade muttered. "Then you must never go back," her father said sternly. "You were lucky this time." Unlike the first time Jade saw the black dog, the second time stayed with her for years, an encounter strange and horrifying enough for her to never return to Hubbard Park. Sasha thought Frank was going crazy after the divorce, and that his belief was a product of his insanity, along with wanting to be called by his first name. Jade wasn't sure at all. She never developed a belief in the supernatural, other than in this instance. Sasha became even more skeptical over the years after dating a guy named Jordan who believed in everything paranormal. At one point, Jade dated Jordan's friend Miguel. He was equally a believer, but somehow more rational. Whenever the three of them mentioned the black dog incident and their varying beliefs, Jade shut them down. After her 27th birthday, it became easier to shut everyone out. She broke up with Miguel and moved into a dilapidated house in Winstead with Colt, her slightly effeminate college roommate. He hated talking about anything even remotely scary and never brought up Jade's past, so their living arrangement worked perfectly. Still, she couldn't shake some things from her childhood. She still felt uncomfortable seeing someone walk a run-of-the-mill black dog around town. She still felt uncomfortable calling her dad Frank, even though he became less of a dad over the years. When Colt told Jade she should try therapy one night, she agreed to his surprise. "So that's a yes. You're agreeing with me for once," Colt said as they stared into the glow of an autumn bonfire. "I thought you said therapy was stupid." "I never said that." Jade slightly nudged him. "Besides, maybe I was stupid for doubting you." "Really?" "Yeah. I mean, it hasn't always been easy." Colt smiled and they leaned into the fire, admiring the glowing embers and a brisk September night. It almost made Jade forget her ex-boyfriend and financial troubles. Something deeper troubled her, though. It had been 15 years since her encounter with the black dog and her even creepier encounter with her dad on the side of the road. In those years, he never warned her about the black dog again. She figured it was just a story to keep her out of trouble. She thought about that incident around this time of year, and it would usually fade with the autumn leaves. This year it didn't, though. Just as soon as she was about to forget again, she learned that the story Sasha told around the same time of the missing Kensington girls was more than just a story. "What are you reading about on your phone so intently?" "Sorry." Jade looked up at Colt, who was roasting a marshmallow on a stick. "I am reading about those girls from Kensington who disappeared in the 90s. "I thought that was just a rumor." "Apparently not. Here's the weird thing. I'm reading this breaking news article, and apparently there's 2 girls from Kensington who have disappeared around that park again. Chloe Peters and Alexa." "Oh no." "What?" Jade read the name a few times over to make sure she had the name right. "It can't be. He didn't." "For Christ's sake, Jade," he said, getting up to peer over her shoulder. "Is that Miguel's?" "Alexa Boyd, yes. As in Alexa Boyd, Miguel's cousin." Jade stood up frantically and checked the name for the 3rd time. "Yeah, that's His cousin. I didn't get the... Oh, never mind. The alert came earlier this morning. How could I not notice? I didn't get... Oh, shit. Colt checked his phone as well and scrolled through the messages. I didn't see it either, but the alert came earlier today. Chloe Peters and Alexa Boyd, two 12-year-old girls from Kensington, Connecticut, disappeared around Hubbard Park on Thursday morning. That was a little over 24 hours ago. Fuck! Jade ran her hands through her hair and started shaking. How could he not tell me? You've been broken up for a month. Why would he? You don't understand, Colt. I knew his family. I loved them. Have you talked to him in a month? Number. Not really. What do we do? Colt sat back down on this lawn chair and Jade frantically scrolled through the article for a fourth time just to make sure. What can we do? I'm going to text him. Don't, please. I have to. I knew Alexa. I loved her. She was like his little sister. Well, like not literally, but still. Colt, what should we do? Colt stared deeper into the fire as Jade paced back and forth, contemplating whether or not she should text Miguel. When she finally couldn't stand it anymore, Jade stopped looking at Colt and started texting Miguel. She wasn't sure which line of text she wanted to choose and kept erasing her responses. Finally, Colt snatched Jade's phone from her, choosing, I heard about Alexa. Can I do anything to help? Oh my God, why Colt? You were taking forever. Now we wait. Colt held onto her phone. As Jade extended a hand, Colt shook his head. Don't even. Someone with a clear head needs to do this. I didn't even want you talking to him to begin with. Okay, princess, Jade said, sitting back on her lawn chair. Have it your way. Miguel didn't respond, and the longer he didn't respond, the more nervous Jade became. Even when they were in the worst of fights, he would tell Jade everything. After they broke up, it was just radio silence. At that moment, she couldn't even remember why they broke up, just the pain that lingered in his absence. Even worse, she imagined Miguel staying up late, crying in his New Haven apartment over Alexa's disappearance. Miguel was teaching her karate at a nearby studio in Meriden, a part-time gig he picked up to pay the bills. He was also helping her through her parents' divorce. Jade was just beginning to know Alexa really well when their relationship ended abruptly. I want to go there, Colt, she said, almost in tears as they were putting out the fire. I just want to get in my car and drive there. He shouldn't be alone through this. Jade, I know you still... How do I put this? It's 10 at night and you haven't spoken to each other in a month. I don't care how late it is. He shouldn't be alone through this. I don't care what happened to us right now. Alexa means everything to him, and God knows he's still... She couldn't finish that sentence without a teardrop trickling down her cheek. She stopped herself and stormed inside their house, headed into the living room, and turned on the small, boxy television they had kept since their college years. The reception was super glitchy. After nervously slamming the remote into her palm, she flipped through several channels before stumbling upon the 10 o'clock news. She waited anxiously as a female reporter brought up their featured story. A tragedy in Meriden, Connecticut, Anne Nevine proclaimed, locking eyes with the camera. Her well-dressed co-anchor, Dan Patricks, looked on stoically as footage of police and a search and rescue team patrolling Hubbard Park rolled across the screen. 12-year-old Kensington girls Chloe Peters and Alexa Boyd disappeared on their way to Hubbard Park Thursday morning. An Amber Alert has been issued and police and locals have engaged in a non-stop search for the two girls. Jade and Colt looked on helplessly as an anchor interviewed an older couple in the park. The text on the bottom of the screen made her stomach churn. The search for missing Kensington girls underway. While the couple admitted that they hadn't seen the two girls, they confessed to spotting a strange man in the woods on their way up to Castle Craig. My husband and I were walking up around... What was it, honey? 6? The older man nodded. We didn't see the girls, but we did see something strange. There was this tall man in the woods. I don't know what he was doing there. He was, let's see, maybe 6 feet, long blonde beard, some kind of baseball hat with a bird on it, and smelled like menthols like my Morty used to smoke. He waved at us and walked away. It was so strange. I don't know what he was doing there. An aggressive headache overwhelmed Jade's senses as the reporter continued on about police cautioning the public that there were no suspects yet, but to keep a watchful eye. The woman's description of the blonde beard and stench of menthols took Jade instantly back to her childhood. Even Colt, who only met Frank once during college, gave Jade a look. The woman gave a universal description. She saw my dad. Frank. I was about to say, what the hell was he doing in the woods? Maybe he was looking for something. The timing just seems weird. But Frank's a weird guy. With those words, the conversation faded to silence as the news story changed to one about a local sports team changing its name. Anxiously gripping her phone in her palm, Jade imagined Frank in the woods, smiling a yellow, decomposing smile. That awful smile crept underneath her skin and kept her awake some nights, especially when she remembered the weird ways he came home. After a long day at work, he often said he was going to the hills, especially if he was frustrated. Sometimes he came home many hours later, covered in dirt or bruised, claiming he took a bad fall. She accepted this excuse once or twice until she realized the trail wasn't that long or dangerous. Before Jade drifted off to sleep, she remembered years ago when she looked up the black dog legend in her middle school's computer lab. She read about two geologists who fell to their deaths after seeing the black dog a third time. She couldn't remember their names, but was stunned by the legitimacy of the source. Still, she didn't remember herself experiencing any sorrow or any luck many years before when she saw it for the first time. Just as she slipped into a deep, uncomfortable slumber, she recalled Sasha telling her that the dog attempted a voiceless growl at her dad as they walked back up the hill before scampering off, leaving no footprints behind. Come to think of it, dogs typically growled at her dad when she saw them. When Jade awoke the next morning, she had a thought dancing on the tip of her tongue, and Colt knew exactly what it was. As she entered the kitchen, Jade blurted out, "I think my dad might be a serial killer." Colt looked up from his cereal and sighed. "You're so predictable." What do you mean?" "You don't remember the last several times you called him a serial killer?" "He fits the profile. He's a loner. He goes on long walks and long trips alone, and when young girls disappear, it's always around where he lives." "I knew you would say that. One description about your weird dad on TV, and all of a sudden..." "It's too coincidental. Him being in the woods to probably, take a smoke. On the day the girls disappeared. So what? He lives right near the hills. And what about his weird black dog story on the day he just so happened to see me on the side of the road? Seems like misdirection." "Oh God, not the damn black dog. Do you actually believe in that?" "Number, I don't know. Of course not. It just seems like a weird thing to say at a weird time. And the dog was blurry and made no noise when it barked." "What does that have to do with anything? Also, everything's blurry when you remember your childhood. I love you, but it's almost like you want him to be a serial killer." This gave Jade pause. Until Colt pointed it out, she hadn't considered how often she mentioned her dad's serial killer vibes or her uneasy encounter with the black dog when she was young. Her friends, especially Colt, were probably sick of it. 15 years had passed without her discovering any proof for her accusations or any more idea about what significance, if any, her encounter with the black dog held. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but would you like to go to Hubbard Park today?" She nodded enthusiastically. "I'm not sure what we could do. Maybe it will give you peace of mind." "Maybe we can help." "I'm not sure how, but okay." After finishing their breakfast, they put on their barely used hiking shoes and Colt drove them to Hubbard Park. On the way there, Jade kept refreshing her messages, hoping for any sign of Miguel. She even deleted several messages in hopes that they would be delayed, but hope, like anything else, was futile. Instead, she stumbled across an article in which a woman named Haley insisted that the disappearance of Alexa and Chloe was connected to the disappearance of her friends Krista and Eve in the late 90s. The woman discussed spending years searching for her friends with a suspect in mind, but no conclusive evidence. Jade wasn't sure if she had omitted the suspect's name or if the news site chose not to publish it at all. Check this out. Mere seconds after Colt pulled into the dirt lot by the trailhead, Jade shoved the phone into his hands. Don't just nod, read! Haley Brunel believes the disappearances of her friends in 1999 are connected to the tragic disappearance of... Yeah, so they might be. What's your point? Read a little bit further. Brunel believes that her friends are no longer alive. Well, that's dark. Yes, I'll read on. And fears they might be buried somewhere in Hanging Hills. Authorities state there is no reason to believe this at this time and will continue their search for Alexa and Chloe. I believe her. You don't know her. Does that matter? I know you're overwhelmed with all this. Let's just take things one step at a time. As the twosome walked onto the dirt trail, they remarked how quiet and empty the trail was for a Saturday morning, with the exception of a guy speeding by them on a mountain bike. No matter how hard Colt attempted to make idle conversation, she couldn't shake the thought of the girls from different decades meeting the same fate. She couldn't shake the thought that Frank was somehow involved. Jade felt her mind and body slip into autopilot as Colt droned on about his own relationship troubles and how steep the hill was. Colt didn't have the body type or demeanor for hiking, so they took a short break halfway up the hill. He sat upon a rock, griping about how they should have packed a water bottle. She paid no mind to his banter as she saw a figure standing at the top of the trail that stopped abruptly at a winding road. She could recognize the wavy, shoulder-length brown hair, slightly muscular build, and well-worn Nirvana smiley t-shirt from anywhere. He was staring at something across the road. Miguel! Jade felt the trembling intonation of her voice as she met his surprised but despondent expression. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you. He shook his head and gave her a faint smile. Hey guys, I'm sorry I didn't return your text. I've been out here for hours. I'm so... Miguel raised a finger to his lips. No offense, guys. I don't want to hear that right now. I've heard too much of that over the past 2 days. Jade struggled to find the right words. Look, we're here to help. Colt's eyes widened, but after processing those words, he nodded in agreement. Thanks, guys. I'm not sure what we can do. I'm not sure how to start. The police searched the area with their dogs over the past 2 days and didn't find anything. They've moved on to other areas. Jade wanted desperately to put an arm around his shoulders, but stopped a few inches short of the small of his back. But you're not convinced. Miguel shook his head and sighed, running his fingers down the dark circles under his eyes. They were going to Castle Craig. It was their hangout place. I know this sounds crazy, but I don't think they'd be anywhere else. It doesn't sound crazy, Colt said. Your cousin's a badass hiker like you, and I'm sure her friend is too. Miguel smiled. Thanks for treating her like she still exists. My whole family. They act like she's gone. It's been less than 2 days, and they're simultaneously talking about preparing for the worst and praying to God for her return. I don't want to do any of those things. It doesn't help, guys. Clenching his fists and holding back tears, Miguel motioned for them to step onto the road. I've been all over these God-forsaken woods. The only place I haven't been yet today is Castle Craig. People are idiots, so we have to be careful walking up. Colt and Jade nodded as they crossed onto the left side of the road. Have you found anything at all? Jade noticed her own nervous inflections, but it didn't matter. It felt good to just be near him again. She noticed he was skinnier and not in a healthy sort of way, but skinny, like the month his adopted father took ill when they were in college. She noticed bruises coursing the length of his arms, not the kind he usually incurred from a karate match, but the kind of bruise one would receive from a great fall. Just some footprints off the trail, but I don't have the type of expertise to tell what those are. Times like these make me wish my Uncle Tony was still alive, Colt remarked. They could see the tower from their vantage point, and surprisingly few cars in the parking lot surrounding it. He was a detective. Miguel reclenched his fists. Maybe yours would take this investigation more seriously. Hey, Jade, You okay? The three of them turned around to see a small, vaguely spaniel-like, short-haired black dog. Jade felt all the hairs on her neck pierce her skin as the dog sat by the curbside, happily panting, but without a sound, as Miguel and Colt eagerly pet it. Just like years ago, the dog looked simultaneously blurry and vibrantly clear, especially its brown and strangely sad eyes. Her father's haunting words, 3 times for death, echoed through her mind, along with the guy's oblivious laughter. I needed this today, Miguel said, smiling. A lone truck passed them as they scratched the back of his ears. Poor guy is cold. I hope his owner is nearby. Jade, are you good? Colt took one look at her frozen green eyes and grunted. Oh God, you think that's the black dog, don't you? Miguel looked at her as well. Oh no, I remember now. Jade, that's not... 3 times for death. I'm going to die soon, Jade murmured, unable to move any part of her body. That's a ghost dog, all right, Colt said, laughing and nudging Jade. Ease up on her. Miguel placed an arm around her back. It's just a dog, Jade. It's really friendly too. It looks young too. It can't be the one you saw years ago. 3 times for death, Jade murmured again. When the guys attempted to move her a few inches forward, she wouldn't budge. But Miguel's phone came loose from his pocket. The dog opened its mouth to bark. No sound came out, which, infuriatingly to Jade, didn't faze them one bit. But when the dog grabbed his phone like it was a chew toy and began to run, Miguel shouted, "Damn pooch!" and began to chase it back toward the road. Colt followed stragglingly along. Guys, don't! Jade finally managed to shout as they sped back down the road and toward the trail. As the dog ran, it looked increasingly blurry, and not just because of its speed. It also had a slight misty aura around its body. Watch out! The dog dashed down the hill they walked up and then several paces off the hill. For a moment, the dog looked like it was floating across the decaying leaves. They didn't pay attention to where they were running as they struggled to keep the dog in sight. All at once, they tripped over a jagged rock and tumbled down a hill far off the trail, which was thankfully mostly leaves and dirt. Jade reached out to find anything that would break her fall as she saw Colt somersault past her. They were free-falling with the dog still in sight. Jade wondered if this was really it. The 3rd time, Frank and her grandfather warned of it. Perhaps she would face the same fate as those geologists, falling to a dark and terrifying demise. Just before she thought of praying to some deity she wasn't sure she believed in, they stopped rolling. Miguel was the first one to stand up, shouting obscenities, before bending over to help up Jade first and Colt, who almost pulled him over. They checked each other for blood and broken bones. When they were satisfied that they were bruised but stable, they spotted the black dog in front of a shovel staked upright into a mound of dirt. Miguel's phone lay on top of the mound. When he reached for it, they saw the dog growling at the shovel, but like its panting or bark, without a sound. Oh my God! That's a gravedigger's shovel. A really old one too, Colt said. My grandpa brought one of these home from a crime scene once. That's so eerie. Miguel reached to grab the shovel at its handle, but Jade gripped his wrist. What is it? I think we're standing on a burial plot. They jumped back a few paces. The mound of dirt was outlined in a near-perfect rectangle of about 5 feet in length and maybe a couple in width. That's a human body under there, Jade stammered. She was certain enough to make that claim, remembering her late uncle's burial years back. We've got to find our way out of here and tell the police. Yeah, Colt said, visibly shaken by the scene. Jade was breathing heavily when the dog rubbed his head against her leg. Hesitantly, she looked into its sad brown eyes and touched its frigid back. She was certain this was the same dog she had seen years ago. Why it wasn't invisible like a ghost, she wasn't sure, but it didn't seem menacing one bit. Despite how young and short the dog looked, its touch indicated it was an old soul, one that lived perhaps countless lifetimes. I'm sorry, Jade whispered to the dog. You were trying to help. Miguel! Drop the shovel! Colt suddenly shouted. Miguel was digging tenaciously into the dirt, tears streaming down his cheeks. Miguel, stop! Jade screamed. They grabbed onto each arm, but Miguel pulled himself away, practically diving with the shovel. Come on, Miguel. Let go. It could be them. It could be them. The three toppled onto the plot and covered their ears. A sudden crack or bang pierced the air. Miguel looked fearfully over his shoulder as the bang repeated a few times. By the time Jade and Colt also realized what it was, Miguel was screaming, "Run!" The sound of gunfire was unmistakable. They weren't sure where it was coming from, just that they had to run, no matter how blindly, away from the sound, which grew closer and closer. They were running back up the hill when they fell down, or so Jade thought. She wasn't sure if she could still hear gunfire or if it was all in her head, but she was too terrified to look back. For a moment, Jade thought the dog was running beside them, but when she turned to her left, she saw Colt starting to lag behind. She yelled for Miguel to slow down, grasping onto Colt, who was practically hyperventilating as they finally crossed back onto the main trail. They no longer heard the sound of gunfire. They fell to their knees, coughing and wheezing, struggling to gain awareness of their surroundings. Colt doubled over and vomited onto a pile of leaves. Jade grabbed onto his back and he emptied what little contents he had left from a light breakfast. "I'm sorry," Colt uttered weakly. "No, honey," Jade said. "It's not behind us anymore. Miguel, if you have service, call the police." Miguel nodded and pulled out his phone, which only had a couple of bars. As the dispatcher picked up, he anxiously glanced over his shoulder for any unwelcome sound or figure. "Hello? Hello? Yes. Yes. My name is Miguel Boyd. My friends and I were hiking the Hanging Hills Trail from Hubbard Park and... Yes, in Meriden. We found a gravesite and heard nearby gunfire and... God damn it! No!" Before he could relay any more information, his phone drained to black. "You gave them enough info," Jade said, noticing her own phone was dead as well. "Colt, do you have... Never mind. You left it in the house. God damn it." "Do you think we're safe, Miguel?" Colt stood up slowly, wiping some vomit from his lip. "I don't want to find out." Miguel fixed his shirt and then looked up at Jade's watery green eyes. "Let's get the hell out of here. Not run. Just walk with intention. Hopefully, by the time we reach the trailhead, the cops will be here." The three of them walked side by side in silence over the footbridge and back to the parking lot. There were still no hikers on the trail. Jade didn't know what to say. She was both terrified and relieved. The dog she feared for all those years was nothing to fear at all. She wasn't sure if it was a spirit or some type of immortal entity, but it wasn't the evil creature, Frank, or the countless individuals that encountered the dog that made it out to be. If anything, it wasn't angry at the people who saw it for a second or third time, but trying to seek help. Something far more evil lurked within those hills. The black dog was warning of that evil. At that moment, Frank's fear all those years ago seemed infinitely less likely to relate to a curse or legend. When they reached the trailhead, a single police cruiser sat idling in the parking lot. The three of them rushed over to the lone officer who was caught off guard as they gathered around him. After motioning for them to calm down and that he could only hear one person at a time, he took their statement. They told the officer every excruciating detail, which he recorded on his mobile laptop. Jade even told the officer about the black dog, which caused him to look up and wince before continuing to type. By the end of their frantically told, albeit thorough story, the officer called for backup on his radio. Then, he sectioned off the trailhead with red tape with black lettering that read, "Do not enter." The mere words caused Jade's heart to jump. "We're going to close the trail to the public today," the officer said. "We received a few more phone calls about the gunshots, so we're going to follow up on this. We'll call you if we have any additional questions. You'll be hearing from us within the next few hours. Here's my card." "Why wouldn't he ask us to show him the burial site?" Miguel said gruffly as he opened the door to his beat-up Camry. "Keep your voice down," Colt snapped, unlocking his car. "He said he'll follow up with us." "Do you want to go back to our place?" Jade said softly. "Thanks, but I have to make some calls to my mom and aunt. I'll catch up with you guys." On impulse, Jade reached over to hug him. This caught Miguel off guard, but he ultimately fell into her embrace and pulled her in closely. At that moment, all the anger and pain that lingered from the breakup subsided. She was just glad that he was there and safe. She didn't have to ask to know he felt the same. "I'm here for you, through all of this." "I know. I don't know what to—" Instead of finishing that sentence, Miguel kissed her on the cheek. She smiled and watched with an ungodly amount of uncertainty, fear, and bliss as he sped out of the park. Colt sighed and hugged Jade as well, apologizing for the vomit that splattered onto her shirt, which caused her to snort a laugh. They drove in silence all the way back to Winstead. In the silence, Jade, of course, thought of everything they had been through, but kept coming back to the shovel. She was almost sure she had seen that type of shovel before. As a teenager, Frank tasked her with mowing the lawn every other visit. If she remembered correctly, that shovel lay in the shed with the lawnmower. The memory was so clear because she remembered how unusual it was for Frank to own it. It would be another day and a half before the officer returned their call with the unfortunate news that they had neither located the burial plot nor the man with the gun. This caused Miguel to angrily return to the hills without Jade or Colt's knowledge. After searching late into Sunday night, he never found the plot either. It would be only another week before the news coverage died down over Alexa and Chloe's disappearance. Miguel took up extra hours at the karate studio and Colt at the Bushnell to get their mind off of their anxieties. Jade grew sick of seeing the same regulars at the brewery, especially being hit on by them, so she called out the following Saturday. That day, Jade drove aimlessly throughout Meriden, not sure what she was looking for that the police didn't already find. Other than a few missing person signs around town, she didn't uncover much. She knew she wanted to stop by Frank's house. When she reached the street, she thought about pulling into the driveway until she saw his car wasn't there. The lawn and bushes looked overgrown, as if he didn't live there anymore. Jade couldn't remember the last time she visited his house, just that he never neglected yard work. Just when she was about to turn the car around, she noticed a woman sitting in a parked SUV across the street. Without much forethought, Jade pulled up behind the SUV and parked, cautiously approaching the driver's side window. On any other day, she wouldn't have been as brave, but the stern look on the face of the woman with jet black hair spiked her curiosity. The woman rolled down the windows. Jade rocked back and forth on her heels and gulped. "Yes? Can I help you?" Her voice was both stern and dismissive. "I already told the other neighbor that I'm not fucking leaving until the cops come." "No," Jade said hoarsely. "I have a feeling we're here for the same reason." "Yeah? What would that be, honey?" The woman was probably in her late 30s, but her vast crow's feet made her appear much older. On her lap lay a pair of sunglasses and a stack of photographs. "You one of Frank's whores or something?" "Well, I got news for you, honey. I'm his daughter!" This gave the woman pause. "No shit. All these years, and I never saw his family around. Some father he must be. What's your name?" "Jade." "Jade, do you know who the hell your father is? Do you know what the hell your father is?" Reluctantly, she nodded. "I think I know, but I don't want to." "Shit, hun," she said, stepping out of the vehicle. The woman was maybe 5.5 feet, but carried herself like she was much taller and unafraid of anything. "You have to. I'm sorry to break the news to you, honey, but 17 years ago, your father killed my friends." "Oh, God, you're Haley Brunel." Jade felt her whole body go numb. She never thought she'd have her suspicions confirmed all those years later. All those times she half-jokingly told her friends about her dad's serial killer vibes were no joke at all. She didn't have to ask for proof to know Haley had it. She felt a weird mixture of total nauseousness and relief. "You've done your homework. Good for you. I've been following him for so many years." "Is that what you're doing here?" She nodded, glaring at the house. "He hasn't been here for at least a week, maybe longer. I'm sure he has taken off ever since that news report broke." But, I'm sorry. I need to sit down." She felt the world spinning rapidly around her and her entire body growing numb. Haley knelt down by Jade as she cradled her head in her hands. I'm sorry, Haley, I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry about, she said. It sounds like you've known about him. I thought I did. Jade looked up, her face drenched in an ugly mess of tears and sweat. When I was a teenager, he started acting really weird. He divorced my mum and cleared out his house. He also took really long trips and asked me to start calling him Frank. Haley paused. You didn't know this, but Frank had been stalking us for months before they died. We used to go to Hanging Hills all the time. He found us on the trail one day and told us that tired black dog legend. I'm not sure what the hell he was doing there, but he saw us on the next several trips. He told us how pretty we were, and I'm not sure if you want to know more. I do. That's disgusting. He told me the same thing. I feel sick. Did you call the police? Feel everything you need to. It's a lot. Yes, we did, and they didn't take us seriously. After they disappeared, I remember angrily pounding on his door. I screamed at him and told him he didn't deserve to be alive and didn't deserve to be a dad. Oh my God! He filed a restraining order against me and my family. I haven't found anything since, any more evidence, but I know. Are you an investigator? Haley chuckled, glancing over her shoulder for cars. Just a very pissed-off single mother. I forgot to ask, what are you doing here? You'd probably think I'm crazy. Try me. My friends and I went looking for those girls. We saw the black dog. Jade was surprised she wasn't judging. It's hard to explain what it is. It's not like a ghost, but kind of blurry when you see it and cold to the touch. Anyway, the dog led us to this burial plot with a long shovel staked in it. A gravedigger's shovel, she remarked coldly. Yeah, we also heard gunshots and ran. It was pretty terrifying. We told the cops, but they didn't find anything. Jade's words seemed to cut through Haley's stern exterior. She sighed, running her fingers through her hair. The last time Krista, Eve, and I went there together, we saw the dog too. It led us to the same kind of plot. When we told the cops about what we found about Frank following us, they didn't go out there. It makes sense, Jade said sadly. My dad had a few good friends on the force back in the day. You never answered my question. They both stood up and took another long look at the house. Haley adjusted her jean jacket, furrowing her brow. Jade glanced at her, lower lip slightly trembling. What are you doing here? When I was a kid, I saw that shovel in his shed. I wanted to see if it was still there. We can go look. We just have to watch out for the neighbors. They crept across the street and into the tall grass. Jade peered through the window while Haley scaled the side of the house. The interior was completely vacant, save for a lone, unplugged lamp on the hardwood floor. Jade scrambled to the side and noticed the garage was vacant too, and the windows were collecting cobwebs. As they entered the backyard, she could see from the single-hung windows that the kitchen was completely stripped of its appliances. Take a look at this! Haley had busted the lock to the grey saltbox shed. Jade hurried over. They stared jaw agape at the red writing hastily scribbled all over the walls and floors. There were several names and dates repeated in different lengths. Oh my God! They saw the names immediately. Eve Cross and Krista Nolan, 1999. Haley gasped and clasped a hand over her mouth, her tough exterior slipping into one of absolute shock and terror. There were several other names they didn't recognize. Ali Sheelan, 1992. Naomi DeLeon, 1994. Ricky Johnson, 2006. Jade wrapped an arm around Haley's waist as they saw the next two names. KHLOE, Peters and Alexa Boyd. No date followed. She wondered if she should take the sign as a positive one, an indication that their fates hadn't been sealed yet. There was another name in the far corner, one with an L that she couldn't quite make out. I'm going to check inside the house, Haley said, her face flushed and pale. Just to be sure the girls aren't there. You should call the police and let them know what we found. All these years. Yeah, Jade said. Be careful. It was all too much. Her mind couldn't tell her body to reach for her phone. The names paralyzed her with fear. The closer she looked, the more she found in the far corners of the shed. Victoria, Malcolm, 1991, Billy Smith, 1989, Nikki Lamarick, 2002, Mayella Cruz, 2009. Who were these girls? When did her dad have time to find them? She had been in the shed a million times over the years, even as an adult. Why were the names here now? In the furthest corner of the shed, which was devoid of any light, she saw the final name, Little Troll. No dates followed. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't see either. All of her senses were fading. When she opened her mouth to scream, she couldn't do that either. She could only hear the distinct sounds of the shed door latching behind her. The darkness was utterly disorienting. She felt herself slip into a deep, panicked, and nightmarish slumber. The slumber felt like an eternity of being unable to breathe or think coherently. Through the darkness, she could see faint images of the girls she never met. Billy Smith wore a blue and green sequin top when Frank stopped her on the footbridge, claiming he had lost his daughter. She was skipping school, which she was failing anyway, and eager to help. Victoria Malcolm wore a pink flannel shirt when her father claimed to be a friend of Victoria's dad atop the stone tower. She thought she knew all of her dad's friends, but he seemed nice enough and claimed to play basketball with him in high school. Eve Cross and Krista Nolan were wearing the new Silverchair shirts they purchased at the concert the night before when Frank told them at the trailhead that he was a roadie for the band. Nikki Lambert wore a grey American Eagle sweatshirt when Frank told her that her mum was looking for her. Nikki and her mum were the best of friends, like the mother-touched-daughter duo on that WB network series that Jade used to watch. It wasn't clear what Mayella was wearing when her face was covered in dirt, but she felt her fear and sadness being betrayed by her own soccer coach. It wasn't long until Jade realized she was covered in dirt too. When Jade regained her sense of taste, she realized how appalling the taste of soil truly was with its chalky, earthy texture. She attempted to spit it out, but more dirt trickled down, so she sealed her lips entirely. When Jade regained her sense of smell, she noticed the soil's horribly sour and metallic scent, which she had a difficult time breathing through with only centimeters of her nostrils uncovered. When Jade regained her sense of sound, she noticed the crackles, clicks, and pops from above. She also heard the sound of her phone buzzing somewhere. When Jade regained her sense of touch and consciousness, she was absolutely horrified by the immense pressure pushing down on her body. For several minutes she tried to thrash her body, but only moved an inch at best. She was losing oxygen again, and rapidly. From above, she heard more distinct crackles, clicks and pops followed by the sound of grating and rasping. Something or someone was digging her up. It wasn't the spade of a shovel. Its movements were still rapid, but yet more gradual. She watched the dirt flick upward in small chunks. When her nose and mouth were unearthed, she realized two small black paws were doing the digging. When the paws had removed enough dirt from her body, she used all of her strength to force her body upward, using what minimal arm strength she had left to crawl out from the grave. The black dog bit onto her sleeve and helped tug her the rest of the way. As Jade rose to her feet, struggling to catch her breath, the dog guarded her in front, raising its tail with its ears flat against its head. The dog stood much taller than its familiar spaniel-like stature. If not for its familiar features, she would have mistaken it for a Great Dane. The dog was no longer blurry, but glowing in a misty green-tinted aura. Its sad brown eyes were no longer sad or brown, but blue and fiery like the combustion of carbon. Jade stared in horror at the unmarked dirt plots that surrounded her from all sides. They numbered in the dozens, maybe double or triple that. She couldn't be sure. Then she looked back, even more horrified, at the grave she came from, which was at least 4 feet deep. How long had the dog been digging for? How long had she been buried? All time seemed to elude her. She knew she heard her phone but couldn't find it. She knew not to run, though, with the dog guarding her, moving with every direction she turned. "Thanks, buddy," she whispered. "Should we—" Just as she was about to move, the smell of menthols overwhelmed her senses the same way it had for many years. From between two bushes, her father, a frailer-looking man than she remembered in torn flannel, appeared, carrying the gravedigger's shovel in his hand. "You were never supposed to find out," Frank said coldly, looking at the dog and not her. Jade said nothing. "You were never supposed to find him either." Silence. She stared blankly into his arid blue eyes as if she were daring him to strike. She was no longer afraid of the man she stopped calling Dad long ago. "Is this the third time you've seen him, Frank?" With these words, Frank's arid eyes widened, his pupils dilated. He attempted to lunge forward, drawing a small grey pistol from a concealed holster, but the black dog leaped and tackled him into the grave. Frank unleashed a blood-curdling scream. The scream lasted mere moments before gnawing and gurgling sounds took its place. The gnawing and gurgling sounds turned to ones of crumbling as a mound of dirt collapsed into the grave. After the dirt collapsed, she heard the collective screams of Frank's countless victims escape into the atmosphere. These weren't screams of terror, but cries of freedom, cries for the monster to stay buried forever, every inch of his evil being rotting into the earth. The dog jumped from the grave into a nearby pile of leaves, its stature morphing back to spaniel form. It took one last look at Jade, its eyes now a bold shade of brown, and drifted into the vast woods. Jade started to run, faster than she had ever run before. Somewhere in the distance, she heard people screaming her name. The closer she ran, the more distinctly she could make out the voices of Colt, Miguel, Haley, and possibly Sasha, though she couldn't be sure. Then another female voice called her name that she didn't recognize at all. Jade lost all sense of where she came from, but at least knew the direction she needed to run toward. Somehow, she also knew that the black dog wouldn't let a single soul be buried in Hanging Hills again.